There is nothing more cruel in the world than feeding someone false hope. And our story begins exactly with that, showing a girl thrashing around in her room, trying to be calmed down by the maid after a huge disappointment. The servant referred to her as Your Majesty and begged her not to cry. Please. Then the girl lifted her face from the pillow through tears and explained that she had held on to hope for a long time. But in the end, the boy she liked ended up marrying someone named Lily, a girl the protagonist didn't even think was his friend. On that day, 5 years of unrequited love had come to an end. Right after that, she started screaming again, burying her face in the pillow once more and leaving the maid even more desperate. All of this because some random boy married Lillian. The protagonist remembered the first time she saw the boy. One of her friends asked her if she had heard that the heir of the Margrave Empire was going to appear at the ball, something she had no idea about. However, now that her friend mentioned it, she remembered something. Finally, the boy entered the hall with short steps, attracting the attention of our girl. He was perfect, with piercing yellow eyes and a magnificent face. In that moment, it was as if bells were ringing inside the girl's head, and she was extremely excited about the prince's arrival. Euphoric, she ran inside the palace looking for her father. And as soon as she found him, she made it clear that she wanted to marry the heir of the Margrave Empire. And she even justified that she was completely and desperately in love and wanted the man's blessing. But he asked, without any enthusiasm, if Estella was referring to Isaac. Something she confirmed, after all. It couldn't possibly be any other man. Then her father sighed, trying to remain calm as he said that he couldn't give his blessing for that marriage, which left the girl absolutely outraged. But the man had a very good reason for it. Isaac was already engaged to the eldest daughter of the Grand Duke. That took Estella by surprise, as if her whole world had collapsed. So she threw herself onto one of the chairs there, going through the greatest suffering of her life and worrying her father with all that dramatic scene. The man shouted for one of his servants to fetch a doctor to assist his daughter. Sometime later, when Estella looked more withered than an old dried flower, she received at least unexpected news. When her father entered her room saying he had good news, although she didn't seem very excited. That was when the man revealed that Isaac's wedding had been postponed. That gave the girl hope, and she immediately asked why that happened. Before that, the king had met with an important partner, explaining that his daughter was in a deplorable state in bed and that he had a rather embarrassing favor to ask, something that made the man extremely interested. So, getting straight to the point, the king explained that his daughter loved Isaac far too much. And of course, he would never ask for something like canceling the engagement, but he wanted to know if it would be possible to postpone the marriage for a few years. Then the Duke explained that he didn't have to worry about that at all, because the marriage would only happen once the prince reached adulthood. But of course, the king wouldn't reveal all of that to his daughter, so he only said that maybe they were having some kind of problem in their relationship. With a leap of hope, Estella asked if he thought the two might end up breaking up for some reason, but her father only answered that maybe, because he didn't want to feed too much hope in the girl. Even so, that was enough for her to build false expectations. The girl prayed day and night for it, and she waited anxiously for Isaac's return after he left for the battlefield, thinking about how things would unfold. But she ended up facing a terrible surprise. The love of her life came back determined to marry Lily. While watching the scene, the poor protagonist only thought that this could not be happening to her, trying not to show her pain, because there he was, Prince Isaac, kissing his fiancée who was not Estella, while a chorus of praise was directed at the couple. In the middle of that crowd, the girl struggled not to sob from crying. That was when she realized it was better to leave that place, and no one would miss her anyway, since there were many nobles there. The girl fled from there as fast as she could. She wasn't going to just stand there like a statue watching the supposed love of her life marrying someone else. She ended up sitting by the edge of a stream alone with her thoughts, and staring at her own depressed reflection in the water. That was when someone called her attention, because the girl had spent so much time there that the wedding was practically ending already. Even so, Estella had no idea what she would say to the boy. She imagined congratulating him on the wedding, but knew that would be nothing more than acting. And deep down, she was aware that when the time came, she wouldn't be able to say those things and didn't even want to. But she also couldn't stay there like a spoiled child. She needed to get up and react. That was when she heard someone say that she could go back in time, something that left her very disoriented. The girl looked around to see if she could find the owner of that voice. But since she didn't see anyone, she concluded that she was so stressed that she had started hearing things. Then she noticed something strange in the lake. It was as if there were something in there, and she approached to see what it was. But when she got closer, her eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was a person. However, the girl ended up getting so close that she slipped right there, heading toward the water quickly. She couldn't even try to save herself because there was nothing to hold on to. And so, our girl ended up falling into the water. She couldn't believe the drama of that situation. She was dying in the middle of the wedding of the man she loved. As she sank deeper and deeper into that lake, she could only think about how pathetic it was to die like that. Suddenly, the girl jolted up, rising from her own bed. She stared at her hands, wondering if she was really alive. And then she noticed that her maid was at her feet, calling for the princess without believing that she was alive too. But for some reason, she looked much older, as if 10 years had passed. The woman, still unable to believe what she was seeing, asked if the princess had any idea how much she had scared the nanny, and she couldn't believe the girl had simply jumped into that lake on purpose. But Estella quickly interrupted her speech, explaining that she hadn't tried to kill herself at all, and that it had just been an accident. Only there was something even stranger that worried her. She didn't recognize that room, so she decided to ask the nanny what place that was and if they were still inside the palace, which also left the woman a bit lost. She didn't know what the princess was talking about because it was obvious where they were. Before she could say anything, 2 children burst through the bedroom door, and they called Estella Mom, with eyes filled with emotion. That was too much new information at once for the princess, who didn't know who those children were or what they were even talking about. But one of them climbed into her lap, asking if she was okay. Trying to situate herself in that whole situation, the girl asked what the 2 were talking about and why they were calling her mother, which seemed to worry the little girl a bit, and her brother, who wouldn't stop crying. For some reason, those 2 seemed very familiar to the protagonist, despite her never having seen either of them. That was when a 4th person entered the room, asking whether by any chance Estella didn't even want to see her own children. That figure left the girl speechless, because it was Isaac, in the flesh, right in front of her, closer than he had ever been to the girl, staring at her with his deep eyes. Estella tried to clear her doubts, asking what he was doing there, and even better, where exactly she was, a question that left her nanny without anything to say. Isaac also didn't know if she was being serious or if it was some kind of trick, and he was quickly distracted by the supposed children of the protagonist, calling him Dad. The prince carried the little girl in his arms and asked why the woman was acting like she had never seen them in her life. Again, the girl asked where she was, since no one wanted to answer, and she took the opportunity to ask why he was treating her as if she were his wife. Also asking what had happened to Lily. She was sure she had seen the 2 of them get married, so there was no reason for him to treat her that way. Besides that, she needed to know who those children were and why they were treating him as their father. Isaac stared at her with a distant look, maybe trying to understand whether the girl was trying to make fun of him or not. Then he warned the nanny that he would call one of the doctors to have a look at the woman, since she was acting in a very strange way. So maybe she had hit her head at the bottom of the lake when she fell. But Estella interrupted, saying she remembered her lake very well and that she had indeed fallen into it at her wedding. That was when it hit her. They were teasing her for sure. Estella asked again about Lily and questioned if by any chance she was also involved in that whole thing. Confirming that they were messing with her, the girl said it wasn't funny. But Isaac was truly worried and asked the nanny to call the doctor immediately. Meanwhile, the children who were still in the prince's arms asked if their mother had perhaps hit her head, something he confirmed. Estella couldn't be more lost. That was when an idea popped into her mind. Staring at those children, noticing their features with blonde hair and their faces, they definitely could be the children of the 2 of them. The problem was that our girl had not the slightest memory of a night she spent with Isaac. That was when she noticed other details as she looked at her reflection in a small mirror beside her. A bit of chubbiness she had on her cheek just yesterday had disappeared, and her eyes had changed too. Meanwhile, Isaac wouldn't take his eyes off his wife, absolutely certain that she had gone crazy. When Estella looked at her whole face in a larger mirror in the room, she was very frightened. That was really her. So she decided once again to ask and try to clear her doubts with what she had, questioning Isaac what year it was, to which he replied that it was the year 650. Then things started to click, even though she thought it was impossible. She was sure she had woken up on May 17th of the year 643, because that was around the time when she started fantasizing about being a bride. So that was it. Estella had jumped 7 years into the future, but she couldn't believe this was really happening. Her children once again called for their mother, very confused by the way Estella was acting. It didn't take long for the doctor to arrive in Estella's room, and after only a quick evaluation, he concluded that the girl was suffering from a classic case of amnesia. All of that considering that she remembered every event that had happened up until she turned 19 years old. But that only left the girl even more disturbed, arguing that she couldn't remember even the tiniest thing after reaching that age. In her mind, our girl wondered if it was really possible for 7 years of memories to simply disappear from her head. So, the doctor reaffirmed that it was probably just partial amnesia, which relieved Isaac, since that meant that maybe his wife had only hit her head really hard when she jumped into that lake. The doctor also warned that even if she didn't have other visible injuries, Estella might feel a certain headache eventually, and her memory might return in fragments. But since she was very confused, he would prescribe a sedative just as a precaution. Worried, Isaac asked what would happen if the girl's memories never returned, to which the doctor replied that it wouldn't stop Estella from continuing her life. It might take a few years, but the boy shouldn't worry too much. He turned to Estella and asked her not to try to force her memories and just go with the flow, something the girl agreed to do. And then he left, receiving a warning from the prince that he would be called if needed. Now that they were alone, the girl could ask if those two tiny little things were really their children, something the prince confirmed. Not only that, but they were twins and very cute. They finally answered her question about where they were. They were at the mansion of the Margrave Empire, which probably indicated that the two of them were married, which was kind of obvious to the boy, who already seemed to have no patience left for that whole show. Meanwhile, Estella only noticed that over the last 7 years, Isaac had become more handsome, taller, and stronger. She couldn't even believe that for some reason she had grown up, married that extremely handsome man who should be illegal, and even had his children. It was quite the future. When she let her celebration slip out regarding the current reality, the prince didn't understand, but Estella explained that she just found all of that very unexpected, because just thinking that the two had gotten married was like winning the lottery. But she quickly shifted the subject. Trying to be sure of the situation, the boy asked whether the girl had really lost her memory, being scolded by his son. He seemed extremely stressed and questioned again if the girl wasn't just pretending to mess with his head. But Estella had no idea what he was talking about, until the prince revealed that she was very good at manipulating people in that way. And then he asked whether she sincerely didn't remember how cold she had been to him just the previous day, and now was saying that marrying him was like winning the lottery. The girl didn't know why Isaac insisted on acting that way. There was something in his eyes in that specific moment that showed a resentment he carried toward her. Even so, the girl tried to stay firm and reminded him that he heard very well what the doctor said, but she also took the opportunity to question why he thought she was trying to mess with his head, because she felt he was mad at her for some reason. The protagonist even argued that they needed to try to understand each other. That's why she asked if she had really treated him that coldly, since at that moment, just looking at her husband made her heart race. After all, no one would be upset if, in the blink of an eye, they discovered they had married their first love. But the prince seemed increasingly impatient. That was when he revealed that the two of them were in the middle of a divorce, which practically sucked all the happiness out of Estella's body. She asked him to wait a moment before asking what he was saying. She couldn't believe they were really getting divorced. After all, why would they divorce? Which sounded like another joke to the prince. Their son, who had been watching that entire fight up close, immediately began to cry. He didn't like seeing his parents having disagreements. And it didn't take long for the little girl to cry as well, clinging to her father's legs. That scene left Estella disturbed, and Isaac lost his composure for a minute, asking them to leave that discussion for later, especially because he didn't know how the girl had fallen into the lake. But he made it clear that as soon as all the divorce procedures were completed, he and the children would disappear. Then Isaac turned his back to the princess and asked her not to get too stressed, but Estella just stood there, not knowing what to say. Before leaving, he made sure to comment that that lake wasn't even deep enough to reach Estella's thighs, and that there was nothing at the bottom except soft, fluffy sand, indicating that the protagonist was lying to everyone there. With that, he slammed the door, leaving the girl alone, completely stunned by what had just happened. In fact, our girl was in a terrible situation. She couldn't remember anything, no matter how hard she tried. No memory came to her head after what happened at Isaac and Lily's wedding, and they were very vivid memories, which made her think that, instead of amnesia, it was more plausible that her 19-year-old self had jumped through time, and that thought cleared her mind. So that was what had happened at Lily's wedding. There were many things she wanted to ask Isaac, but it was obvious that he didn't want to say anything to Estella at that moment, so she didn't even have the courage to try asking anything, just remembering those eyes full of anger. She couldn't believe everything she was living. It was far from being the wedding of her dreams, and just remembering that the two were about to divorce made everything worse. She wanted at least to remember how the twins were made, because for sure it must have been one heck of a night. Sometime later, her servant went to her room to serve tea. Since she was the only person who listened to Estella, the girl asked if she really had lost consciousness somehow, to which the woman replied that she had jumped into the lake. And one of her servants luckily saw and ran after her, but it was already too late. That was strange to Estella, because she was almost certain she had fallen into the water by accident. But now the details of what had happened that day were very different, and she was sure she had heard a voice telling her to go back in time. With that in mind, the girl suddenly stood up, leaving the poor servant startled, shouting that she was going to end up hurting herself if she made very abrupt movements. But all the girl said was that she needed to take a look at that lake everyone kept talking about. The nanny was going to try to stop the girl, but knowing it wouldn't work, she only asked that she at least wear a shawl before leaving. It didn't take long for her to arrive at that place, being followed by her servant, who soon scolded her, asking why she was doing that and telling her to get out of the water immediately. She was shocked because Isaac was right. The water barely reached her thighs. When leaving the lake, she was met by the maid who asked what the girl needed to check with such urgency. But honestly, Estella explained that not even she knew what she was trying to understand. However, based on everything she had seen up to that moment, she had only one conclusion. But she knew that if she said what she was thinking out loud, no one there would believe her. So she needed to come up with another plan. Thus, she turned to the nanny, asking where Isaac was because she needed to talk to him immediately. And the woman replied that he was probably in the greenhouse with the children, which was where she intended to go. As they walked, the girl asked the nanny to wait, and reminded her that all her memories since she was 19 had been erased. Just saying that was enough for the woman to tell her not to worry too much about it, because they would surely return soon. But the girl explained that there was something more important than that. She needed to know if those twins were really hers, and if she had given birth to them and indeed was married to Isaac, which the woman confirmed. But her real doubt was the reason the two were in the middle of a divorce, which was something more difficult for the woman to explain, since she argued that she had no right whatsoever to interfere in a couple's problems. However, she suggested that if Estella really wanted an answer about that, she should ask His Majesty directly. Just that idea alone already filled the girl's eyes with tears, and she asked if by any chance the nanny hadn't seen the way the prince looked at her. It seemed like he was ready to kill Estella with his bare hands. She wasn't stupid enough to ask him that, so she insisted that the woman at least give her a hint. Even so, the nanny insisted that this was a question the girl might be able to resolve if she spoke with Isaac, an answer that surprised Estella. As a last hope, she asked if the servant truly couldn't help her in any way, which the woman confirmed, so there was no other choice. The servant knocked on the greenhouse door, explaining that the princess had a matter to discuss with him, and Isaac allowed her to enter. Nervous, the nanny asked the protagonist to try her best to have a calm conversation with her husband, something Estella doubted was possible. When she entered, he was having fun with the two children, but when he saw Estella in front of him, he thought she might be confused and questioned whether she shouldn't be resting. So the girl explained that exactly because she was so confused she couldn't rest. Without hesitation, the boy retorted that stressing herself about anything wouldn't make her memories return any faster. But Estella said that even if they never came back at all, she needed to know some things she had forgotten, receiving the same cold look from Isaac. So she decided to say whatever came to mind. She explained that she had gone to take a look at the lake she fell into, and it was definitely shallow. But she wanted to know if it had always been that shallow, like 10 years ago, and the boy confirmed it. The children, meanwhile, were happy with the girl's presence, excited to serve her some tea. Since the lake water had always been that way, then she had something else to ask. She wanted to know if the boy hadn't originally been engaged to Lily, his cousin, because the last thing she remembered was that the two of them had gotten married. And the fact that this was the last thing she remembered left the boy stunned, but she confirmed that she was being serious, making the prince let out a scoffing "ha" in disbelief. She didn't know what kind of reaction that was. Maybe she had hit a nerve. So even if he didn't believe her, he had to say something because he was her husband and the closest person to her now. That's why she intended to start by clearing up some misunderstandings, which made Isaac pay attention and become curious. In an impulsive act of courage or complete madness, Estella revealed that she believed she had traveled to the future. Hearing that, the prince looked at her as if she were the craziest woman in the world. Even so, the protagonist didn't stop, repeating that he had heard her very well, and that she was sure she had traveled through time, skipping 7 years of her life. The boy couldn't say anything. He just stared at the girl rambling, and that's exactly what she did, saying that she knew it sounded crazy. But no matter how much she thought about it, she didn't believe she was suffering from amnesia. I mean, she had fallen into a lake that didn't even have any rocks. So how could she have gotten hurt? She asked if he could at least believe that the girl had fallen into the same lake at his wedding with Lily, and she was almost sure she heard a voice telling her to go back in time, a voice that called her name. She didn't know why Isaac couldn't believe her, even though she was being so honest. She just wanted him to have a drop of trust. But all the boy replied was that she was trying way too hard, and he asked if there was any maid outside to take care of her, which pushed Estella over the edge, making her shout, asking why he couldn't believe her or if their relationship was that full of distrust, and begging him to have at least a little faith in his own wife because she was being extremely serious. Her nervous breakdown was interrupted by her daughter with a teacup, saying what it was for her, and teaching her how to drink from a cup, as if the mother had forgotten good manners too. The girl handed the drink to Estella with a huge smile, insisting that she drink it because she made it herself. So Estella blew the tea a little before taking it to her mouth. She knew that what was inside was just dirt and water, and for that reason, she stopped halfway and asked if the girl really wanted her mother to drink it all. To her misfortune, the little one confirmed with sparkling eyes, Trying to escape the situation, Estella explained that she thought she wanted just a little more sugar and asked the two kids to go get some. And so they went, restoring the peaceful and quiet atmosphere of the greenhouse, which didn't last long since Estella soon tried to resume her train of thought. But Isaac asked her to sit down before anything else. But the girl was very spoiled and questioned whether she really had to sit on the floor, to which the prince replied that there was a cushion there. But that was strange because even inside the palace, she had never sat on the floor before. Then Isaac took off his coat, spreading it on the floor and asking if that helped her. After she finally sat down, the prince recapped to make sure he had heard her say that she had traveled through time from the past to that moment, something Estella confirmed. And following that reasoning, he confirmed that although she was 26 years old on paper, inside she was still a 19-year-old girl, so she hadn't lost her memory. Finally, the protagonist felt that he was beginning to understand, and she took the chance to resume and say that she had heard someone calling her name on the day of his wedding with Lily, and that person told her to go back in time. She felt very strange, so she tried to check if that sound had really come from inside the water, but she got dizzy and ended up falling and drowning deeply. Then she opened her eyes and suddenly 7 years had passed, just like that. She didn't know why he was looking at her like that, and she quickly asked if Isaac was going to say she was crazy again, but that wasn't it. To be honest, now that he stopped to think about it, the way Estella was speaking and acting was very different from before, exactly like she was when she was 19 years old, which meant that either she was an extremely good actress or it was truly believable that the girl had traveled through time. She took advantage of that vote of confidence to reaffirm that it was because she wasn't acting, and she wanted to know if he distrusted everyone like that. But the boy explained that of course not. He had become that way because of a certain person. She knew he was talking about her, but not the Estella she was. Only the one she supposedly had become during those 7 years she no longer remembered. Once again, the silence was interrupted when the children arrived with a little dirt cake, asking their parents to taste it, and claiming it was a delicious macaron. The poor Estella no longer knew who to ask for help. Still, she couldn't simply ignore the sweet looks of those two pleading for her to taste it. They were so cute it made her want to cry. So she gave in, taking a bite of that disgusting mud cake and pretending it was delicious. So delicious that she wanted the two of them to make more for her, something that surprised the children. Watching them from afar, the girl couldn't ignore the fact that they were full of light, suggesting that maybe they had taken after her. But Isaac explained that they were excited because the girl had come to the greenhouse that day, which caught her by surprise. Then, the prince said that she usually didn't go there, which surprised her even more. But the boy repeated that she really didn't go, with a certain resentment in his voice, leaving Estella a little worried. Maybe she had lost her essence in the middle of those years. The children soon approached, saying they had made more food, and he pretended the smell was very good, playing along. One of them tugged on his mother's clothes to get her attention, receiving an intense look from Estella. It was the little boy with open arms, ready for a hug, and the protagonist tried her best to respond because it had to be clear that they were her children. But that wasn't how she felt. She felt like a stranger in her own life, and the little boy quickly realized that something was wrong. Even so, his father asked Lou not to push too hard with his mother, so he stepped back, and Estella commented that she really couldn't remember everything. And that's why it was hard not to feel like it was the first time she was seeing both children, catching the attention of little Lou and the other two. When her family looked at her like that, she felt even more like a stranger. Trying to break the ice, the girl asked if by any chance the girl's name was Lucia, so they could be Lou and Lucia Mondiaz. But Isaac answered that it was Lustel and Lucia de Messian. It was a surprise to the girl that they had taken her last name, even though Isaac's last name was very beautiful. After making that comment, the girl regretted it instantly. Maybe she had said something wrong again. She felt like she was walking on eggshells whenever she tried to interact. So she tried to change the focus a little, asking who had chosen their names. Isaac explained that he had chosen them, being congratulated by the girl who was now interacting more with Lustel. But the little boy turned his face away after having his cheek squeezed, something the protagonist couldn't help doing because he was so adorable. Returning to the central subject, she reaffirmed that she wasn't lying. She really believed she wasn't suffering from amnesia. She had simply jumped through time, and the way he and the children treated her proved that her future self had done something very wrong, which made her think that she had come from the past precisely to understand what those mistakes were. Because the girl she was at 19 years old truly loved the prince. That is why she asked if they couldn't just set aside this whole divorce thing. Isaac seemed tired as he explained that the divorce had been her idea, something that completely shattered the girl. But the man explained that she had been the one responsible for asking for the divorce. If she couldn't believe it, she had spent years obsessed with that boy, even waited for him to return from the war. When she asked why, the prince made it clear that there was no way for him to know that, but he was certain that the woman had even given him custody of the children. So it was possible that at some point the girl had considered that her family was some kind of burden. So if she thought she had come from the past to fix those mistakes, frankly, he disagreed. Because even if she said she loved him, her future self had been planning to leave him, and that couldn't simply be erased. Since the boy had already been hurt, to be honest, he was very tired of this whole situation, as anyone would be. He remembered very well when he was walking through the halls with the children who asked why he was crying, but Isaac didn't answer. He just picked up the pace, and Lustiel asked him to slow down a little. But since that didn't happen, she ended up tripping over her own feet and falling hard on the floor, which brought Isaac back to reality and made him apologize for walking so fast, in addition to checking if she was hurt. Lucia was also worried and wanted to know why her father was crying, but he said he wasn't crying, wanted to know where she got that idea from, to which she replied that he looked sad, imitating his facial expression. The prince tried to make things lighter, asking if he really had made a scary face like that, and apologized, saying that it wouldn't happen again. Even just the day before, Estella had started treating him and the children as if they didn't even exist. Even though they had gotten married and had children, it had only been a marriage of convenience from the beginning. Lou and Lucia felt strange around their own mother, and the few times she played with them had been enough for the children to become attached. She was always busy, which was understandable, but the boy was certain that she had no interest in that family whatsoever. So the good things in a marriage were quickly erased by the disagreements between the two. And in the end, Estella was the first to jump ship, something that had happened just a week ago. He remembered her saying that she couldn't live with him, and therefore she would move out, but he could keep the children. Furthermore, the girl would send money so that they could support themselves, and she had already prepared a place to live and everything she needed to disappear. That was a surprise he couldn't understand where it came from. That was when Estella said in full words that she wanted a divorce. The boy clenched his fists, trying to contain his anger, before asking if there was another man involved, making the girl sigh without answering clearly. That was the kind of person Estella was at 26. Lucia called his attention again, but the boy was lost in his thoughts. First, Estella said she couldn't remember anything, that she came from the past, and that she believed that happened so she could fix her mistakes. And now she wanted him to believe something as ridiculous as the fact that she loved him. Isaac was already at the peak of his anger when he said that if Estella truly wanted to fix her mistakes, she should have faced him when everything happened. But that didn't happen, because the girl certainly believed that the real mistake was the two of them ever meeting. So he told her not to have too much hope. After all, how many years of his life had he spent clinging to false hope because of the girl? He couldn't simply forget the Estella he had lived with all that time, because when he looked at the girl in front of him, he could still see traces of her, that person who hurt him over and over again. That conversation left our girl even more discouraged, and the boy delivered his final blow, saying that he no longer believed in the promises he made when he proposed to her, when the girl was still 19 years old, because to him, those were only words that lost their meaning over time. Now, everything was very different. On the day they got married, the eyes of both of them shone with love. Isaac remembered as if it were yesterday when the protagonist asked if he promised that he would trust her and wait for her, with the hope that he would say yes, because the girl loved him far too much. Thus, the two exchanged rings in a passionate gesture, and he reminded Estella that after they got married, they were happy for 1 year. They spent peaceful days, and it didn't take long before they discovered that Estella was pregnant. But that happiness ended quickly. He had let his guard down and forgotten that any secret, no matter how well hidden, was always revealed. One of those times while they were talking, Isaac confessed that in that kingdom, where he didn't seem to have a place of comfort, Estella was his safe place. But even then, he felt that she was hiding something from him, a secret equivalent to a betrayal. During that time, his parents had been falsely accused of conspiring against the kingdom. In addition, his younger sister had been exiled from that country, and the person behind all those decisions was Estella. Even knowing those accusations were false, the girl decided to close the investigation about his parents' case and send his sister away on her own. Estella, the sweet and kind girl who exchanged marriage vows with him, had done that. His son called him back to reality with a smack on the head, being scolded by Isaac, who questioned who said he could do something like that because he might end up getting mad. But that wasn't true. He couldn't be stressed for even a second with those children. So he picked them up in his arms, asking if they were ready for bed, and they confirmed. It had been a long day. However, while putting the little ones to sleep, they insisted that they still wanted to play. But the prince made it clear that they could do that when they woke up, because the sleep fairy had said she would visit both of them. Lou couldn't help commenting on how good it had been to play with their mother that day, and that filled the prince's heart with hope, letting them talk more about it. Lucia still laughed happily because her mother enjoyed her mud macarons, so they agreed to make more the next day, and their father took the opportunity to reinforce that they needed to sleep. but warned that if they continued like that, they would end up stuffing Estella, which the children took playfully, suggesting that maybe they should make a medicine for her stomach too, which was a great idea according to the prince, who was always entertained by the imagination of his children. Finally, sleep won, making Lucia yawn while her brother was already on his 10th sheep. With them quiet, Isaac could leave the room, closing the door carefully, and being surprised by Estella shouting behind him that she couldn't get divorced and wouldn't do it. But the prince was more concerned about the children and covered her mouth, saying she would end up waking them up. So the girl apologized because she hadn't even realized that they had gone to sleep, but she resumed the subject, reaffirming that she couldn't get divorced, questioning whether it wasn't possible to repair the mistakes she had made during that time. The prince was already fed up with anything coming from the protagonist, but repeated that he had said there were some types of mistakes that couldn't be fixed so easily. And the problem wasn't even with Estella, it was with him. He was already too tired of the whole situation. But of course the MC wouldn't give up. After all, he was the love of her life. That's why she decided to ask if there wasn't anything she could do to make him less tired, promising that she could make him so happy that he would forget all the pain, which only made Isaac even more convinced that he was talking to a wall. He had already forgotten how immature the girl had been at 19. The prince gave in, saying that he already believed that she really was a time traveler and all that. But as he had said before, his decision was made. Even so, the girl asked him to give her a chance, because she had been in love with him for 5 years. And now that boy, who was a dream come true for Estella, was saying that she had hurt him even though she didn't remember. For the MC, what mattered was how she felt now. And the fact was that she still loved Isaac, so she needed to try at least. She only wanted one more chance, at least while the divorce was being processed. And her husband couldn't hide how surprising that twist in events was between the two of them, because the day before, she could only look at him with disdain. And now there she was begging to get one more chance. With a satisfied smile on his face, the boy decided to give in, giving her one single chance. But he made it clear that in the meantime, he intended to hurt her just as much as she had hurt him, which left Estella paralyzed, especially because she had no idea what she had done in those 7 years. Even if she was trembling, she knew that at least now she had a chance to do something. And all she needed to do was fix the wrong things her future self had done, which seemed very possible to her. After all, she was the kindest, sweetest, and most beloved princess on that continent, and she was also the only heir, besides being very outgoing, which is why she was sure she would be able to achieve her happy ending. 2 weeks had passed since they made that agreement, and the girl was thrown on the couch, wondering how someone could be so cold and stubborn like a mule. She felt like she was confessing her love to a brick wall every time she talked to her husband. She spent the last 2 weeks showering Isaac with gifts, and the nanny decided to interfere and explain that she couldn't simply buy someone's love. But if that was the case, the girl didn't know what else to do, because the prince didn't seem very happy, nor very open to talking with her. So that was the only way she could think of to show something. Until then, she didn't think human beings were able to be that disdainful, but she was certain that Isaac would spit in her face if she tried to get closer, or even snort on her. The girl was scolded by the maid for her words, who commented that it was as if she had gone back to being 19 years old, and explained that although her memories were gone, she needed to put in effort to behave normally. So Estella asked what this new Estella was like, and the woman explained that she was always well-dressed and very refined. For example, she would never say words like spit or snort, which surprised the protagonist a little, who doubted she ever behaved like an actual adult, except the nanny was even harsher when she said that she was now a princess and a mother, so she shouldn't be lying on a couch saying those horrible things. But to Estella, that felt normal. She had always been like that. However, the older she grew, the more she matured. Except from the nanny's words, it sounded like the protagonist had become a cold and even somewhat hypocritical person, which wasn't like her at all. So the nanny explained that she had changed a lot after getting married. That interested our girl very much, so she asked the woman to say more about that. So the lady replied that in general, she had changed a lot. At first, the nanny was happy because she thought the girl had finally grown up. But Estella interrupted to comment that it sounded like she had done terrible things to Isaac, and wanted to know if that was part of the reason she had changed. But again, the nanny asked not to involve her in the couple's marital affairs, since it was not her place to talk about anything regarding their marriage. As shocked as the girl was with every revelation, all she could do was take care of herself. Still, Estella doubted that this was truly happening. She needed to know exactly how she had treated Isaac in the past, so she could reflect about what she had done and finally end this silent war. The nanny felt awkward saying it, but the truth was that the princess had made many mistakes and had done very cruel things. Hearing that, the princess asked for an example because even if it was difficult to say, she needed to hear it in order to change things. So the maid explained that she locked herself inside her room for several days. She dismissed her servants and didn't even let Isaac come in, Of course, nobody saw anything, but the evidence pointed to the girl having an affair. After all, she brought a different man to the mansion every day. Estella felt horrible, to the point of wondering if that was what hitting rock bottom felt like. She couldn't believe that was how she behaved in the future, and she ended up letting it slip that she didn't think it was possible for her to be that low. But the nanny asked her to stop tormenting herself and think about the future. Even though she had tried the whole gift thing, it clearly didn't work, so she needed to find a way to show the prince her sincerity, with words or even a letter. Estella's concern was that he wouldn't listen to her. After all, she had been unfaithful, but the nanny argued that that was something only her past self would know for certain. That was when she had an idea. She needed to gather all those lovers and hear their truths. When the nanny asked if she intended to do that in front of Isaac, the girl immediately denied it, explaining that she needed to hear it by herself. The lady's concern was what would happen if they confirmed those affairs, but then there would be nothing she could do. She would simply have to accept that she had been the worst person in the world. She was completely falling apart. A few days ago, she thought that this mission would be a piece of cake. But if the princess really had cheated on Isaac with so many men, she was certain she deserved to die. She threw herself into the maid's arms, hopeless. She didn't know what to do, and at that point, she couldn't see a way out of that situation. But if it really was true that she had done those horrible things, then maybe it was better to let the prince go. Except the nanny argued that if she considered the fact that the two were still living together, it was probably because Isaac still had some feelings for her. After all, the prince had waited for the girl all that time, so she shouldn't blame herself too much. In fact, what she needed to focus on was resolving the situation with him. Or did she think all couples lived in perfect harmony? Everybody had problems. Still, the protagonist doubted that those couples went around throwing divorce papers, saying, "I can't do this anymore," and acting like spoiled children. Her vocabulary bothered the nanny once again, who asked her to be careful with her words. But that wasn't important to Estella right now. The fact was that she had been the one responsible for asking for the divorce, and now Isaac was fed up. If she were in the protagonist's shoes, she wouldn't give a damn about her own dignity either. Desperate, holding the nanny's hands, she begged the woman to be honest. Supposing the woman had a stupid husband who arrived one day saying he wanted a divorce, but after a day he changed his mind and asked to cancel that divorce, what would she do? And as if that had really happened, the nanny indignantly answered that she would tear the guy in half. That way he would never be able to be with another woman again, which was a rather extreme answer, considering that the idiot in this situation had been the princess. But by the time the nanny realized this, it was already too late. Trying to save herself, she changed the subject, saying she had heard one of the children crying, and asked her to wait because she had to take care of it, despite not having heard anything. So the lady left the room desperately, ignoring the princess calling after her. And changing the subject again, she asked if she would like to meet the count and his wife, because the Chess family had once asked for a divorce and a sort of miracle happened for them to reconcile. Still, the girl wondered if Count Chess had been as bad as she had been, to which the woman answered that definitely, since he was the worst of the worst. Estella didn't know whether that was supposed to comfort her or what, but it wasn't the time to argue with the nanny, who finally gave a satisfying suggestion, asking if the princess hadn't considered that she and Isaac could start sleeping together again. After all, she had gone back to leaving her room, so all she had to do was sleep with him. Although she didn't have much hope, Estella said she would try to do that, getting physically closer to Isaac first, even though the nanny doubted the boy would even touch the girl, which immediately made Estella blush and scold the maid, saying she hadn't even thought about that possibility. It was just that when you share a bed with someone, you have to see that person's face every day, even if you don't want to. So they would eventually end up talking one way or another. That was why she was decided. She would move her things back to the room that very day. When the woman asked if she would talk to the prince first, the princess questioned what they even had to talk about regarding that, because deep down she knew Isaac would definitely reject the proposal. In my opinion, she was very sneaky. There he was in his office, giving a big no right in the girl's face, which immediately made her question why. And coldly, he replied that leaving the room had been her choice, but it would be his choice to allow her to return or not. After all, she did it without even warning him, and now thought she could come back without warning as well. The girl's argument was that it didn't matter what kind of subject the two discussed. The conversation never moved forward. The girl even questioned whether he had given up on giving her a chance. But the prince countered that sharing a bed was another level of intimacy, and he didn't have to do everything she wanted. But that wasn't what she was saying. She just really wanted to try living like any other couple. Her words made Isaac reflect for a moment before giving in to the girl's wishes. She didn't expect him to agree so easily. She didn't understand the reason for it, but she was too grateful to argue. Excited, she said she would get her things immediately, especially because she didn't want Isaac to change his mind. It didn't take long for rumors to run through the castle corridors among the maids about how they would be sleeping together again for the first time in 3 years. What remained to be seen was whether they had truly reconciled, because that wasn't what it looked like when people looked at the two. Estella had never noticed how many things she owned until she had to move them back to another room. But there was one item that caught her attention: a jewelry box. She had always liked collecting jewelry, but that was too much. After all, why did she need so many rings? It was so unnecessary and extravagant. That was when she noticed Isaac's presence, and he told her not to feel embarrassed and to just keep remembering things. She didn't know what he was talking about until he explained that he was referring to the rings, because according to him, they were all gifts from the girl's lovers. She stared in disbelief. Mocking, the prince asked if she really didn't remember that that was a box full of gifts from the guys who were head over heels for her, and she used to love receiving rings. Trying to save herself, Estella gave an awkward laugh, saying she didn't care about those stupid things, something the boy didn't believe at all. But the protagonist was determined and ready to get rid of all of it. She must have been in a huge streak of bad luck, because she decided to open that box right when Isaac was in the room, and that made the atmosphere terrible again. So much so that she had no idea what to say. That was when she noticed the boy getting closer, which made her nervous, and she asked what he was doing, to which he replied that she had said herself that she wanted to do things normal couples do, so it was natural to be that close to her, ready to unbutton his shirt. The girl screamed, saying they couldn't do that, except the prince explained that he was the one undressing. If it were her, he would be enjoying the show. Nervous, she told him to cover himself, but she couldn't take her eyes off him. She was red like a chili pepper and could only say that they couldn't do that. But the boy hadn't even touched her yet. Covering herself with her blanket, the girl argued that she was only 19 years old, which wasn't exactly true. After all, she had married him when she was 19, and they had already spent their first night together. Even so, Estella pushed him away, saying she couldn't do that now because she wasn't ready, and she had to listen to the boy mockingly ask whether she thought a stork had delivered the twins or what. Even if he didn't understand, the girl tried to explain that the image of him marrying Lily was still fresh in her mind. So, in her memory, the two of them hadn't even held hands, and there was an order to how those things were supposed to happen. That left the boy confused. After all, why did she want to share the bed then? But the girl made it clear that she only wanted to sleep together, literally. So maybe she should have said that. She argued that she had said they needed to talk, but the prince had imagined she meant talking with their bodies. So shameless. She couldn't believe the boy was really being serious about it, so she asked if he liked seeing her embarrassed, something he confirmed without hesitation, explaining that Estella used to treat him very coldly, so it was funny seeing her blush just by looking at him now. And considering she had cut off every conversation he tried to have, it was good to see the girl trying to initiate one. Still flushed, the princess asked if he had any idea how childish he sounded in that moment, and the truth was that Isaac knew it very well, but he was having too much fun to stop. He even said he wished the two of them could have more fun together, which lit a spark of hope that he would annul the divorce right there. But that wasn't the case, because that would only happen if she was satisfied with the two of them making peace on a very superficial level, crushing any hope the girl had. The prince couldn't help noticing the change in his wife's expression. Even so, she didn't give up, saying that the superficial level was the most important one because he never knew when feelings could surface. That's why she would have a lot of patience. She was sure she would make the boy say he loved her someday, and Isaac wished her good luck with that, doubting very much that it would ever happen. When night fell, the girl couldn't sleep. She didn't know if it was because she was sharing a bed with a man or because that man was Isaac, but just being near him made her heart jump out of her chest. Even with all the explanations given by the nanny and by him, she didn't know how things had ended up that way, and she wondered how she had hurt that boy so much. A boy who also couldn't sleep with her by his side. The night dragged on, but in the morning, Estella was amazed by the sight before her. It was like seeing a fairy tale prince sleeping right in front of her, more peaceful than ever. Until then, she had only seen him scowling or neutral when looking at her, but now he had a different glow. The princess truly didn't know how she had been able to reject someone like him before. There was no denying that Isaac was very handsome. Carefully, she moved closer to the boy, touching his face gently while wondering what he was dreaming about. However, in the middle of that affection, the boy woke up asking what was going on, to which the girl answered that he seemed to be having a nightmare, and that if he kept making that scowling face, he would end up full of wrinkles before even reaching old age, which surprised the prince, who asked if his face had really been that stiff, something the girl confirmed. She asked whether he really had been having a nightmare and if he was okay, and Isaac replied that he was. Her curiosity didn't go away, so Estella asked what kind of dream made him move around that much. And honestly, he was also curious about what kind of dream she thought he had been having, but he didn't answer anything. so Estella insisted, saying she was only worried and asking if she wasn't even allowed to do that. A knock on the door interrupted their little argument. It was the maids bringing water for Her Majesty to wash her face, but they asked if it was better to come back later. The prince immediately said it was fine. Staring at his own face in the water, the boy reflected, remembering that she had absolutely no idea how he ended up finding her in the middle of his wedding to Lily. She didn't know anything, nothing at all. And now she was there washing her face as if it were something normal and routine in his bedroom. He couldn't ask anyone in those conditions because she had practically witnessed the death of her parents. While he was reflecting on that situation, his butler asked that he head to another room when he was done washing. But the prince drifted. It was hard to imagine that the girl in front of him was really living life as if nothing had happened. But something else worried Isaac. If he left that place, it would be the end of everything. He didn't even wait for the poor girl to finish getting dressed before leaving the room, making Estella complain. Looking at herself in the mirror, the girl grumbled about him leaving the moment he finished dressing. But luckily for her, someone entered the room saying they had good news. That was something she couldn't miss. And the nanny said that Count Chess had agreed to meet with her, handing her a letter with a royal seal. Basically, the letter said that the countess had heard that she needed help with some family problems, and she was honored to be trusted by the girl for that. So she requested that she meet with the woman and the count the next day in the Rodonia Hall. This made our girl sigh in so much relief. She was already ready to send her reply, so she asked for paper and her maid quickly provided it. The next day, the girl came downstairs all dressed up, which made Isaac question her. And she explained that she was just going to meet someone for a moment. Of course, she couldn't tell him that she was going after the stupid husband and the amazing woman who forgave him to ask how they fixed their relationship. Isaac seemed discouraged, so Estella made sure to ask him not to worry because she wasn't going to meet another man. Even so, pride spoke louder and the prince questioned why he would ever worry about that, even though his posture remained cold and he pulled Lucy out of the room, leaving the girl a little worried. Still, she tried to remain calm. She just needed to meet with the chess couple and return home right after. And so she did at the Rodonia Hall. When she got there, she remembered how much she used to go to that place 7 years before, but now she didn't even know who owned it anymore. She was warmly welcomed by Madame de la Reine, who seemed excited while asking what she was doing there since she hadn't been to the place in a long time, and asked her to feel comfortable, taking the opportunity to ask if she was there to meet someone. Unfortunately, the girl couldn't remember who that person was. Maybe she was from the city of Atil, but her style and accent seemed very similar to the nearby nations. The woman whispered in her ear that the people the princess met with last time had asked to see her again. The problem was that the protagonist had no idea who they were, but the madame continued naturally, informing her that the men had also brought the jewels she had requested, huge rubies, and they said they could make rings or even necklaces that would surely please the princess. That was when it struck her. They were rings like the rings her lovers had given her. She could already picture Isaac taking his children away and saying that he knew everything she said about wanting to fix her mistakes was a lie. So she shook the madam in her arms, saying that she couldn't, leaving her extremely confused. The poor woman had no idea what she had walked into, while the princess didn't know that those men loved her that much. She was acting like a lunatic. And the woman said that they did love her and that she also reciprocated. But Estella denied it without even thinking twice. She asked that a message be sent to them saying that she appreciated the effort but would have to decline any invitation, and the jewels as well, because from then on she had decided to focus on only one man, and she would do everything in her power to make up for all the horrible things she had done to him. She was definitely in love. Then changing the subject, she asked if the chess couple had already arrived because she needed to meet with them. Following the woman to the hall and having the princess's arrival announced, they bowed to her respectfully. They were a very cute couple and looked like they had a lot of love for each other. After leaving the princess there, the madame stepped away, wishing them a good meeting. She just couldn't help wondering what had happened for this to be necessary, and whether something had gone on that she wasn't aware of, because the princess seemed very different from usual. Maybe it was part of her plan or something, but for now she would have to wait and see. After the conversation, Estella returned to the mansion, meeting her husband in a gorgeous hall, full of fancy dishes and even fancier furniture. And tea had been delicately set on the table. Estella's head wouldn't stop. She wanted to know whether Isaac wasn't even a little curious about who she had met. She wondered whether perhaps she was smiling too much at him, and she was sure that if it were anyone else, they would have already asked who she had gone to see. But the prince looked very indifferent, as if he no longer expected anything from his wife. On top of that, she had been the one who suggested that the two of them share that moment together 3 times a day, but she had no idea what to talk about. She felt that every time she opened her mouth, she said something wrong. Meanwhile, Isaac was thinking a lot too, because honestly, he was curious to know who she had met. But he knew that if he asked anything, she would only get stressed. because she hated receiving big questions about her outings. For her luck, the children ended up coming in, looking for their mother, and calling her to play. She patted their heads, thinking a little about the conversation she'd had earlier and what she was able to learn from the chess couple. She didn't know why, but something in the law had changed over the last 7 years, making legal reconciliation harder than before. Earlier, the Countess explained that once the divorce was approved, there was no going back. So if she really wanted to reconcile with Isaac, it would be very hard. Besides that, they explained that there was a fee to pay, and she and her husband would have to remain apart for 3 years before getting back together for real. That was absurd. A reconciliation fee, and the mandatory period before the divorce was finalized could be extended for 2 months before everything was over. The Countess was the one who said that to her. And Estella knew that it was only 2 months, but after that, she wouldn't get even 1 more day, and things would simply proceed until reaching the final verdict. But the most important detail was that if a marriage required a lot of certainty and care to happen, divorce required even more, especially if there were children involved. So Estella asked whether her decision to take her husband back had been motivated by the children's well-being, to which the Countess answered yes. But in the end, that wasn't the decisive factor, because the children wouldn't be happy in a house with unhappy parents, and she was completely confident she could care for them well even on her own. There was only one specific reason why she decided to accept her husband again, and it was that he had shown sincerity to her. Estella's eyes filled with a kind of hope. So that was what she had to do. She needed to show sincerity to Isaac. But to do that, she should begin by getting closer to her children, because the woman explained that if she showed love to the kids, they would return that love with the same intensity. So it was good to treat them like anyone else, with kindness, lots of respect, politeness, and of course, love. And now there she was in front of those little creatures who wanted so badly to play. While stroking their hair, she asked if they really wanted that, and the little ones answered that they wanted to play house, and took the opportunity to call their father, trying to motivate them, saying they would make delicious food and they would do their best to make something their mother liked. So she followed along, making Lucia and Lou very happy. When she stopped to think, she couldn't help noticing the similarities between her and Lucia. It was exactly how she used to be when she was still a child. Meanwhile, Lou seemed like he could get anything he wanted, no matter what. He went up to his father, asking him to play as well, supported by his sister. Isaac didn't know how to say no to those 2 adorable little things, even if he didn't like his wife's company very much. Kindly, she asked him to go. There was no way to deny that invitation. So the 4 of them headed to the greenhouse, and the children started preparing the food, assigning Isaac to be the baby in the game, making the prince ask whether they didn't think he was a little too big to be a baby. But there was no way out. Lucia had already decided, and he was going to play that role whether he liked it or not. They were like movie directors telling the boy to lie down, because that was what babies did. While Estella struggled not to laugh, she was given the role of the nanny, and took the chance to ask what Lucia was going to be, to which she answered she would be the mother and her brother the father. So now they could finally begin. Lucia pretended to take care of the baby, stroking the parents' hair while Lucia called for the nanny. The woman asked if she was feeling tired, playing along, and Lucia explained that she'd had a very hard day at work, so she was exhausted. When Lou tried to approach, however, Lucia told him not to bother her, leaving the protagonist shocked by the reaction. While the father spoke of the baby, the girl replied that she had said she was tired. Noticing that the father wasn't following the script, she explained that he was the baby, so he had to cry. Estella couldn't ignore the fact that there was something very wrong with that game. While her daughter rocked Isaac, asking him to cry, that was when it hit her. Her children were imitating the prince and her, and that was not a good sign. So she decided to stop the game and asked her daughter if she didn't want to make some macarons, pulling Lou along after her. With the way things were, it was better to distance themselves from that situation for a moment. While making the macarons, Estella couldn't help asking what her daughter was going to say, because she needed to know what Mommy Lucia said when the baby cried. Then the little girl turned to her mother and shouted, "Nanny, take care of the baby. I'm busy with my work." That was definitely not the answer the girl wanted. She couldn't believe that was what the mother said, but Lucia confirmed naturally. It didn't seem possible that she had spoken that way to her own children. Estella shrank in shame, which made both kids stop playing to check whether their mother was crying. Between sobs, she apologized. But what mattered to those little creatures was that she didn't cry and didn't stay sad. Still with her head down, the princess explained that she actually wasn't crying. She didn't know where she had gotten lost. She remembered being a person who was easy to get along with and very loving, and loving Isaac a lot. So she wondered how she had managed to make so many mistakes in that marriage. Besides that, she missed her father, and she even questioned whether he knew that his daughter was living inside that miserable marriage. Noticing how long they were taking to come back, Isaac approached, asking why they had been there for so long. Meanwhile, Estella wondered how the prince felt when he saw the way his children played house. He must hate her, and he was definitely very hurt. While holding Lucia, the boy walked up to the protagonist, lifting her chin so she would look at him and asking why she was all curled up on the floor. The prince was holding in his hand 2 dirt cakes that his children had made, and Lucia insisted that her mother taste that pretend food. Estella pretended to eat it, praising it, saying it was amazing and delicious, which motivated the girl to make even more dirt cakes. Isaac stared at her, not knowing exactly what to say, since she was acting in a way very different from usual. With nightfall, the girl withdrew to her room and handed a letter to one of her servants, asking for it to be sent directly to her father as quickly as possible. The prince ended up overhearing that part of the conversation and became curious about the letter being sent to the king, but the girl explained that she really wanted to meet him and would also take the opportunity to ask whether there had been any change in the laws regarding divorce. Isaac looked very worried, even though he knew that that day was going to come sooner or later, but his comment ended up leaving our girl confused. So, trying to be as careful as possible with his words, he explained that the former king was in critical condition. She interrupted him, asking what he meant by former king. That was how the prince revealed that Benjamin was in such a critical state that he could no longer fulfill that role, making it clear that he was still alive, but unconscious. That was a lot of new information for the girl, who just repeated her husband's words before asking whether the current king wasn't her father, and Isaac confirmed. Taking that into consideration, she asked why she was there then. After all, Estella was the only successor to the kingdom of Messian. In fact, the poor thing had studied hard to be prepared to take the throne ever since she was a child. She could even remember her father placing a crown on her head and celebrating the fact that she would be the future monarch. The reason she assumed her father was alive and well was because the nanny kept calling her princess, even though she had a family and lived in a place that wasn't the royal palace. But now she knew the truth. Her father was in a terrible condition, and she had not inherited the crown because she was trapped there. Isaac's silence bothered her, and the girl slammed the table, demanding an answer. She needed to know who the current king of that place was. And cautiously, the boy revealed that the current king was named River Bertrand, also known as Estella's godfather. In an attempt to calm her, the prince explained that her father was probably receiving the proper treatment at the palace. And even if he was unconscious at the moment, he could wake up at any time. Taking everything into consideration, the girl informed him she would visit the palace the next morning, calling one of her maids so she would be aware of it. Head hanging low, Estella sighed and questioned whether her husband really wasn't going to tell her the real reason why she was there. It didn't make sense in the girl's head, because she had always been the heir to that kingdom. So why had her godfather taken over? The problem was that this was a question the boy didn't know how to answer for sure. She raised her eyes, clearly lost, and insisted on knowing exactly what he wasn't sure about. Then Isaac confessed that he wasn't sure she would believe what he had to say. Still, he came clean, saying that people called him a traitor, accusing him of having sold his own body to the girl in exchange for his life. He spoke about how his parents were punished for conspiring to poison the former king, and that the only reason he hadn't been exiled like his sister was their marriage, which, in fact, was the real reason he was there. His parents had been falsely accused, but indeed all the evidence pointed to them. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered now was that Benjamin was in a coma, and no one knew when he would wake up or who was responsible for it. Either way, he warned the girl that she would hear the whole story when she visited the palace the next day, but he tried his best to avoid that topic, obviously because Estella didn't know anything at that moment. The girl trembled, maybe out of anger, when she said that that should have been the reason why he should have opened his mouth and said anything at all. She had jumped through time a month ago, so the boy had had more than enough time to talk about it, until the prince said something that I'm sure he'll regret later. Since you kept not remembering anything, I could keep pretending I didn't know anything as well. That threw Estella off completely. She stood up yelling, asking if that had been his plan from the very beginning, just pretending nothing had happened and that everything was fine. When Isaac had the audacity to say that that would also be good for her, he received a slap in the face in response. The girl was dying of rage. She couldn't believe that the boy she loved so much could say something like that, but the prince was frozen, in shock from the slap he had received. Estella didn't wait for him to react before bombarding him with questions. She wanted to know if he had enjoyed the fact that she had gone back to acting affectionate with him, or if maybe the two of them could simply forget the divorce. But above all, she wanted to understand how he had had the courage to try to hide her father's illness from her. She felt like a complete idiot. Benjamin was dying, and that was a fact. And the girl had wasted the last month begging Isaac to give their marriage another chance as if that were more important. She remembered what the boy had said, about how he wasn't sure she would believe his words. So she sincerely asked whether, if she hadn't asked anything, he would have ever said something. because she was completely involved in that situation and she wasn't as stupid as he thought. Finally, the prince spoke, holding back his anger as he clenched his fists, and he tried to explain that he wasn't trying to play with her by avoiding that subject. Even so, he apologized, saying he shouldn't have said what he said. In reality, he didn't want to bring that up because he thought things could change. After all, she was a very different Estella than the one he knew, so he thought that this time the princess might keep her word. That last part slipped from his lips without him even noticing, leaving him completely embarrassed. Estella, on the other hand, couldn't believe what he had said. Maybe it was the first time that month the boy had been genuine with her. Trying to end the subject, he asked the girl to rest because she looked very tired. But poor Estella had a breakdown because there was so much happening. With her hands on her face, she wondered where things had started to go wrong. She didn't understand Isaac's words about her keeping her word that time. And she even questioned whether the former Margrave had really been executed because of a false accusation of treason. But considering that, if she had really married Isaac despite all those things, that must have been a sign that she truly loved him. Was there another problem she didn't know about yet? But she had a much bigger problem, because now she didn't know anymore if everything the boy told her was actually true. The next morning, the princess's carriage was ready, and she spoke with the nanny, who apologized for having kept things from her, explaining that she had been planning to tell her when things settled down a little more. But Estella didn't blame the woman. Besides, her father was still alive. He had only lost consciousness, so her goal was to meet with her godfather and find out what happened with the line of succession. Before leaving, she took the chance to ask where Isaac was because it seemed like he had slept in another room the previous night, a rumor the nanny had also heard. But when she checked, she found out he slept in another pavilion. Estella didn't look surprised or disappointed, just tired of everything, so she didn't even try to argue. She just asked the nanny to close the carriage door. Alone with her thoughts, our girl remembered that she told Isaac she loved him, but she hadn't bothered listening to his side of the story until then, and she had even slapped him, which must have hurt a lot because it turned really red. Her thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a knock on the carriage door, and to her surprise, it was Isaac standing in front of her, asking that the two of them go together to the palace. When she questioned why, the boy only said it was just because, which wasn't a good enough answer for the girl. She just wanted to know. The problem was that the prince was very stubborn, so he definitely wasn't going to give in. So he simply repeated that there was no specific reason and told her not to worry, making it clear that she shouldn't get her hopes up. He just didn't want her to go alone and then hear rumors later about how his wife fainted inside the royal palace. Taking advantage of the fact that they were alone and in a semi-peaceful mood, the girl apologized for the previous day, justifying that her hand moved before she could even think. But for the prince, there was no problem. After all, he also wasn't feeling very proud of his own actions. A little worried, she asked if the boy at least put ice on the injury, which he denied. And she leaned in to take a look at that bruise, suggesting that Isaac should have done that because his beautiful face was pretty damaged. When she realized what she had done, Estella even tried to pull away and apologize, but Isaac held her hand, placing it again on his face, not to be hit, but to feel her affection again. That alone was enough to turn Estella into a walking red pepper, which made the boy laugh, saying her hand was cold, to which she replied that her hands were always cold, something her husband already knew. Even Lucia had the same problem. While they traveled, the girl took the opportunity to ask if everything that had been said the previous day was true. And when he confirmed, the girl insisted on the boy's certainty that his parents had been falsely accused and executed for trying to poison Benjamin. Shifting the focus a bit, she remembered the name of Isaac's sister, Elena. Our girl asked whether the reason they started to fall apart was because she stopped believing in him, or if she had, in fact, only married him because of a political decision to save his life. But the prince made it clear that wasn't the case. A little embarrassed, Isaac explained that their relationship hadn't always been so difficult. In reality, they lived a time of great peace in the beginning, but things got complicated out of nowhere, mainly because the attempted assassination of the king, the insurrection, and even a problem with taxes were all blamed on his parents. Because of that, he and Lily divorced, as was expected, and the Grand Duke Bertrand even tried to help with the investigation, but the judiciary rushed the decisions. And it was then that Estella showed up. At that time, she was still 19 years old, and she approached the boy saying that she thought everything that had happened to his father was strange, and suggesting that they reopen the investigation. Before the boy had to face the death penalty, the two of them got married and he changed his last name. Now it made sense that Lou and Lucia carried their mother's surname. Isaac also explained that the two of them really intended to start a new investigation, but Estella still didn't know the reason why it didn't move forward. It was finally then that the prince revealed that she was the one who asked to stop the investigation, closing the case and painting his parents as true traitors. But she couldn't believe that possibility. But that was what happened. And the girl had even done everything without giving him any warning. Estella felt awful. She didn't remember doing any of those things, but she had done them, and there was no way to deny it. Isaac continued explaining that after that, she exiled Alina. She was the only person who could testify in favor of his father's innocence. And all of that happened while the princess was still pregnant. It was exactly then that the two of them stopped getting along. Disappointed in herself, Estella apologized, and she promised that this time she wouldn't do anything to betray his trust or deceive him. After that, the trip continued in silence, because there isn't much that can be said with an atmosphere like that. And they finally arrived at the royal palace. Isaac gently helped his wife descend, and Estella couldn't help noticing the changes that had happened in that place that used to be her home. Now the entrance no longer had many rose bushes or fountains. It had lost its life if she thought about it more. Soon an attendant approached them, and the girl explained that she was there to check her father's health and visit her godfather. Then she asked to be guided. The housekeeper stepped forward, saying she would guide the girl to see the king immediately. But Estella interrupted her, saying that she needed to see her father before doing anything else, informing that she intended to look for her godfather on her own after she met with Benjamin. They walked the halls not knowing what to expect, and the girl was soon announced, finding her father in a state very different from how she remembered him. She could hardly believe he was even alive, but the doctor accompanying him explained that yes, because he was still breathing. But the girl trembled. Benjamin was so thin that it was hard to believe he was even breathing, and she took the chance to ask how the treatment was progressing, to which the doctor replied that they were doing everything possible and impossible to accelerate the process, but asked her not to worry too much. Isaac watched Estella in complete shock as she saw the state her father was in, looking away, not knowing what to say. Then he asked the attendants to leave the two of them alone. Now that only the two of them were in the room, the girl made a point of talking to Benjamin, saying that it was his daughter who was there, holding his hands carefully as if he could break into pieces, and repeating that it was Estella speaking to him, his beloved Estella. In that situation, she began to regret only remembering Benjamin's existence because she was in great trouble, so she apologized. Many apologies for not visiting him in that month that passed. She called herself immature and couldn't stop lamenting. She remembered when she was a child, how her father had such strong arms that he could carry her around the palace with no difficulty. The girl cried desperately, begging him to please open his eyes. Leaning against the bed, she wondered how he had become so thin. After some time, the girl finally left the room, catching the prince's attention, who was waiting for her outside. Still with tears in her eyes, Estella apologized for making him wait, but she said that now she had processed her emotions, or at least she thought she had, because she was already sobbing again, saying that she couldn't simply go on. The prince hadn't seen her like that in a long time. So, in a gesture of affection and care, he approached the girl. The protagonist could only think of how her father had been so amazing that she never even had time to miss having a mother. His gentle voice was gentle, and his hugs were comforting even when he was grumpy. He really was a good father. So the girl wondered whether she would ever have those moments with him again, or if everything had already come to an end. Isaac wrapped her in an embrace, letting her cry uncontrollably without judging her, and handed her a little handkerchief so she could blow her nose, something she thanked him for. She had to find a way to pull herself together because there was still a lot to do that day. After all, if the former Margrave wasn't the culprit, it meant the culprit was still out there. The girl finally turned to the housekeeper, saying that she needed to see her godfather. He welcomed her with a smile on his face and enormous surprise. Unlike the atmosphere with her father, now she smiled. It was a relief to see that her godfather hadn't changed much. Bertrand had met Benjamin back in school, and the two had become very close. So he didn't hesitate to accept the invitation to be the girl's godfather, treating her as if she were his own daughter. He joked, saying it would be nice if she showed up there more often because her father had been feeling very lonely. Concerned, he approached the girl, commenting on how her eyes were red and asking if she had been crying. But the girl didn't answer and simply changed the subject, asking how he was. She took the opportunity to apologize for coming there on such short notice, but she needed to talk to the man about something serious. In the middle of the hug, he said she didn't need to apologize for anything. After all, that palace was also hers, so she was more than welcome at any time. With Isaac, he seemed more reserved, only commenting that it had been a while since he last saw him, and the prince greeted him saying it was a pleasure to see him. Either way, Bertrand returned to what Estella had mentioned about having something to talk about, but she asked that they go somewhere more private because there were too many people there, and so they withdrew to the man's office, accompanied by a maid who left something for them to drink. After the woman left, Bertrand asked what his goddaughter wanted to talk about that was so secret. Then she spilled everything, saying that she needed him to listen without worrying too much before revealing that she had lost all of her memories after she turned 19. She knew it sounded insane, but her last memory was of Isaac and Lily's wedding. The man clearly wasn't taking it seriously, mocking the girl for trying to mess with him. However, the prince confirmed that it was true. In fact, Estella couldn't remember anything. That was when Bertrand began taking things more seriously, asking how it had happened. The boy replied that she stepped wrong and fell into a lake, and they thought she had hit her head. When he asked if that was really true, the protagonist nodded in agreement. It was very strange that the girl's last memory was Lily and Isaac's wedding, but that wasn't the point now, since Estella only needed to know everything that was happening. She revealed that she had already caught up on the story of the Diaz family, but now her father was in that critical condition and she didn't inherit the throne, so she needed to know what had happened. Before they started talking, the girl asked Isaac to wait outside the room, and he agreed. Then Bertrand stayed alone with Estella, explaining what had happened. And apparently, to protect Isaac, the girl had negotiated and handed the crown to her godfather, who assumed it had been a move to gain some judicial power. But the protagonist knew that in that kingdom, the monarch didn't have any judicial power. They could give their opinion, but could never give direct orders. However, this rule didn't apply to princes or princesses, so maybe that was why she gave up the throne. Perhaps afraid the girl would think he had bad intentions, Bertrand made it clear that he was ready to return the crown to her at any moment. What happened was that when that whole situation exploded, she still wanted to keep looking into the Diaz case. So he understood why the girl chose to hand the responsibility of the kingdom to him. Now that they were alone, he felt comfortable asking if it was really true that she had lost all her memories. Something that, once again, the girl confirmed, reiterating that she didn't remember anything after she turned 19. Bertrand even asked if by any chance her memories would return, but the doctors weren't sure. The man was concerned because Estella was in shock over it, since it was as if her father had suddenly fallen into a vegetative state overnight. Still, she was relieved to have her godfather's presence. Taking advantage of the topic of the Diaz family, the protagonist asked if the man really believed that Margrave Diaz was the culprit in her father's case, something he quickly denied. Even though she was still a little confused, Estella agreed with the man. And Isaac was also sure his father wasn't behind it, but she also had to consider that she had only heard his side of the story. However, she couldn't deny that it was strange for such an important investigation to be concluded in only 4 days. And she also couldn't imagine that she had truly chosen to stop the investigation out of nowhere. That's why she asked her godfather if he had any idea why she would do something like that. But he admitted that it was hard to say, because it had been some time since he had taken the position of king, and he had lost all his judicial power. But something that wasn't exactly related to the situation came to Bertrand's mind. He looked at his goddaughter with slight concern before asking how things were between her and her husband. The problem was that our girl wasn't sure. She only knew it wasn't exactly going very well. And to be honest, even though he knew it wasn't a very nice thing to say, as her godfather, the moment Bertrand heard that she couldn't remember anything after she turned 19, he thought that maybe things were better this way. Because according to him, the last 7 years had been very difficult for the girl. She didn't only have to deal with her father's problems, but also with a marriage corrupted by sadness. There wasn't a single day after the twins were born that Estella didn't burst into tears. Lily and Bertrand were always very worried and would visit her. But when that happened, she always had an empty and distant look. After recovering from giving birth, Estella went back to going out. But the problem was that both she and Isaac were extremely hurt. So honestly, the man was very happy that she didn't remember so much sadness. But her godfather still had one question. Did Estella truly love Isaac? The girl nodded in response. And taking that into consideration, Bertrand suggested that she simply forget everything else and go live happily ever after with Isaac. After all, her father would want that too. The problem was that, as he well knew, Estella and her husband were in the middle of a divorce. And apparently she was the one who asked for it. So the man decided to give some advice. He said that Isaac really loved the girl. She just needed to show a little sincerity, something she had already heard before and even agreed with. Bertrand seemed more certain than ever. He leaned closer to the girl's face, reminding her that she was Estella, the light of the Messian family, and a child loved by everyone. He asked that his goddaughter never forget that she was the one who lit up that place, the perfect little girl for them. His words struck a very sensitive place in Estella, and she hugged him with great joy, a happiness she hadn't felt in a long time. Bertrand, however, seemed more worried than happy, so he asked that, no matter what she had to do, she should be happy. And the protagonist thanked him. When he asked if the girl had any intention of returning to investigate what happened, Bertrand received the answer that, for now, she preferred to focus on reconciling with Isaac. Because, as he himself said, the incident hurt everyone. In fact, there was no need to rush. She had an entire life ahead of her, but he was a little worried because she had lost a good part of her memory, specifically her adult life. But Estella explained that there wasn't much she could do about that. And even though she looked grown in appearance, she still felt like the child that the 19-year-old Estella had been. Once again, she thanked him for the conversation, saying that she was feeling much better. After seeing her father in that condition, she hadn't known what to do, so it was a relief to see that at least her godfather was fine. She placed a kiss on his cheek, promising she would come back to visit him, something he encouraged a lot because he missed the girl. Before she left, Bertrand said he hoped her relationship with Isaac and the twins would get better. As soon as the girl left the room, she couldn't stop thinking about her father. She wanted to take her whole family to see him, but she knew it wouldn't be good. During the conversation with her uncle, he reminded her of the time she visited a fortune teller when she was 7 and cried her heart out. After that, she decided never to return. So the condition her father was in would probably be something far too complicated for children that young to handle. And Estella agreed. Lucia and Lou probably wouldn't like to see their grandfather that way. So even if she didn't agree, she wouldn't ignore the advice of someone who had done so much for her. She had no choice but to put all her faith in the doctor who was treating Benjamin. As soon as she found Isaac, the girl apologized for making him wait so long. With the visit over, the two went to the carriage to return to their mansion. The girl took one last good look at that place that once was her home, and the prince couldn't take his eyes off her. Finally, the two began their return. Taking advantage of the more private environment, Isaac asked what she and her godfather had talked about, but Estella said they were only catching up. And lowering her head, she informed him that basically they talked about things like judicial power and giving up the crown. For a moment, the man tried to reach for the girl's hand as if he were going to show some affection, but he froze halfway, wondering what he was even doing. The truth was that seeing Estella crying like that made him very weak, but he couldn't give in to her charm so easily. After all, she never cared about her own children, and she always left them home to go to parties with other men, keeping her collection of jewelry from her lovers. And whenever she was home, she spent the entire day locked in her office doing who knows what. Every time he dared to enter, she would explode over anything. She definitely had not been a very good wife. And now all that had changed was that she had lost the memories of the things she did. But there was Estella always saying she had loving feelings for him again. And because of that, Isaac lowered his guard. He couldn't stop asking himself why he had hugged her earlier. The man clenched his teeth. He felt so much anger inside him. And this worried Estella, who asked if he was feeling okay. He had the answer to all his questions. He knew he had hugged her because she was sad, and it was the first time he saw her cry like that. So he decided to give her some comfort, because that's what any minimally kind person would do. Just that, and nothing more. He had no other intentions with that woman who used to be his beloved wife. Concerned about him, Estella asked if everything was all right. He responded by apologizing, explaining that he had dissociated in the middle of the conversation, and tried to change the subject by asking what she had been talking about again. So she replied that she thought she would have to request a new investigation from the Magical Crimes Unit of the Judicial Department. That was a huge surprise for the prince. But although Estella knew it was going to take some time, she wanted to move forward and asked if he would agree to look into things with her. Before Isaac could respond, the protagonist made it clear that she wasn't scheming anything to improve her image with him. It was just that she had talked to Bertrand and he guaranteed he would do anything to help. Isaac agreed with that part about help, but honestly, he was very busy preparing to leave the country with the children, and they were his priority, so he couldn't spend too much time on a new investigation. Awkward, Estella asked if he really needed to prepare so early. After all, they weren't even sure if they were actually going to get divorced or not. Isaac remained silent for a moment, but she broke the silence, as always, saying that if he wasn't sure it was okay, but she wanted him to stop avoiding her because she was trying to be a better wife. A few days later, a letter from her godfather arrived in the girl's hands, and she was already anxious to send a reply. So she wrote that she would like to reopen the investigation in the next few days, and also that she wanted to try to contact Lady Alina, since she was the only witness from that day. The girl wrote her response seriously, because this could save not only her marriage but also correct an injustice. She asked for another sheet from her maid to continue the letter. It said, "My dear godfather, thank you very much for your concern. I have been thinking about reopening the investigation, but I decided to prioritize Isaac and the children for now. Don't worry, I still haven't recovered my memories, and for now I would really like to rest. I am planning to take a vacation with my family, but I'm not sure how that is going to happen." She handed the envelope to her servant, asking him to send it to His Majesty, and so he did. She didn't know why, but sometimes Estella had a bad feeling about sharing these things with her godfather. However, Bertrand always treated her as if she were his daughter, so she owed him much gratitude. A few knocks on the door caught her attention, and she asked that the person come in. To her surprise, it was her children, laughing as always, asking her to join them in their games. It was strange to see them alone, so Estella asked what they were doing there and where the nanny and daddy were, to which Lou answered that Isaac was talking to the butler, and playing with the nanny was not fun at all. She was actually sleeping at that moment. Of course, Estella wasn't going to say that, but she immediately thought that it must be hard for the nanny to handle those two troublemakers. With so much insistence, the girl had no way of refusing the children's invitation, being basically dragged to the garden. She felt amazed by those two. Their hands were so small, and it was crazy to think those children had come out of her. When the girl used to have a crush on Isaac, she would imagine what their kids would look like. But now she couldn't stop wondering what happened for her to change so drastically. Was it her father's accident that made her heart cold? Or was there something more she didn't know about? When they arrived at the greenhouse, Estella asked why the two always chose to play there, to which Lucia answered that she herself had said it was dangerous to play outside. She had no idea why she would say something like that, because how dangerous could the garden of a castle really be? But she only allowed the children to play there. The protagonist then asked if at least they liked that place. Luckily, the children had no complaints about it. They were surrounded by flowers, mud, and lots of space to play. So, cutting the conversation short, they suggested they should have a picnic. And as usual, they asked their mother to wait there while they went to bring the food. Estella now spoke like a real mother to them, asking them not to run so they wouldn't fall. It didn't take long for the two kids to return smiling with their 2 mud cakes, forcing the poor woman to eat, or at least pretend to. They seemed to be in abnormally good spirits today. Even Lou was smiling too much. The two were very close and celebrated anything together whenever they played. Our girl also couldn't help smiling at that scene. Lucia stopped for a moment to stare at her mother, to which Estella asked what they were looking at and if she had dirt on her face. But that wasn't it. She was really beautiful. Really beautiful. And Lucia, who was the most talkative of the 2 little creatures, approached to caress Estella's face, which made her freeze. They loved playing with a woman and had way too much fun doing it. Before Estella lost her memories, she was a cold woman. And ever since that happened, she felt very strange around those 2 children. Even so, they showed a love that couldn't fit inside their little chests for the protagonist. So if they could be happy with a mother as bad as her, maybe she was doing something right. The woman held her daughter's hands, apologizing for not having been able to play with them very much recently, and promising she would do her best to play a lot with them from now on, which made the little ones euphoric, especially Lucia, who ever since her mother woke up had been smiling from ear to ear. A mischievous smile very similar to the one Estella had at the same age. But quickly that smile turned into tears. Contagious tears. Lou also began crying while trying to comfort his sister. Estella had no idea what was going on, and she definitely wasn't prepared to handle that, so she decided to ask why they were crying. She was only 4 years old and was crying just because of the idea of her own mother playing with her. These reactions made our girl question how much those 2 must have lost to react like this to something so simple. While wiping away the small one's tears, Estella apologized for everything she did. She knew she should have treated them much better. Now Estella was the one crying, questioning why she had acted so cold, and stating to Lucia and Lou that she had hurt them. Her future self was a horrible person, and because of that, she regretted everything. But the children immediately hugged her, asking her not to cry. They were always very affectionate with the princess despite everything. After coming inside, the woman ended up bumping into one of her portraits. She couldn't bear that old version of herself. She didn't understand why she had done so many terrible things to everyone who loved her, and not even recognized how precious the people who loved her were, Isaac and her children. Their love was priceless. And that only made Estella even more certain that she couldn't get divorced like that, even if she had to beg for forgiveness on her knees. Suddenly, she tripped over her own feet, and she almost fell to the ground, managing to catch herself thanks to someone else, Isaac, who luckily happened to be there. More than ever, Estella was determined to make him change his mind and to give all the love her children deserved. The love she couldn't give before, but would now repay in full for everything the little ones showed her. When she was in the greenhouse, the protagonist promised her children that they would go together with her and their father to many places and have lots of fun, something that made the kids extremely excited. However, she broke the mood a little by asking what they thought if, by any chance, she separated from Isaac, and the siblings agreed that it would be terrible. Even so, Estella decides to come clean, explaining that she had made many mistakes with her husband, and now he hated her, and even said he was going to leave. Lucia, in her innocence, says that if she made a mistake, then she probably had to be punished or he would get really mad. With that, the woman explains that she planned to make up with Isaac as soon as possible and asks if the 2 children could help her. That was a surprise because they had no idea that such a thing was even a possibility. But Estella reinforces that the 2 of them would be very useful to make their father forgive her. And honestly, she could not do it without them. Lucia doesn't understand and asks why she couldn't, since, in her view, her mother was like a superhero and could do everything. So the woman had to explain that this time it was different. She would really need the help of the children because it would be the only way to fix things. She couldn't do things on her own because she was too weak. Maybe it was the first time Lou had ever seen his mother so vulnerable, but Estella wasn't ashamed and reaffirmed that she really was very weak. And that's why she needed help. because the two little ones were strong. Of course, they took it literally and swore to protect their mother, but those details didn't matter now, because Estella was happy and thanked both of them. Lou, who was more reserved, also stepped forward, saying that he also had strength and would help. That filled Estella's heart with joy, and she asked if her son was really willing to do that, which the little boy confirmed with a big smile. For them, that was a huge achievement. Summarizing, the protagonist asks if the two would really help so that Estella and Isaac would stay together, and the children jumped with joy. So she states that with their help, there would be no divorce between their parents. And from that moment on, they would serve as her little cupids, sealing the deal with a hand slap. And that's how Operation Cupid was launched. The first step was to send a message from Estella to him. However, her thoughts were interrupted. She had heard something. That's when Isaac came in, with a downcast and even angry look, into the greenhouse. A few hours earlier, in the twins' room, they were together with their father, discussing some toys that had broken. And Lou started crying because he didn't want to throw a doll away. His father knew that the reason he was so attached to it was because it physically resembled Estella. And when the poor boy said that he missed his mother, Lucia asked if he was a little baby or something to be whining like that. But the little one answered that no, it was just that he missed Estella because he loved her. And now she wasn't a scary person anymore. With that, Lucia had to agree. She also loved her mother, and things had changed. The two celebrated the fact that the protagonist wasn't that cold woman she used to be anymore. When they started talking about whether their father also wasn't afraid of their mother anymore, they decided to ask the prince. So they bluntly asked whether Estella hadn't been really nice lately, catching the man by surprise. Lucia even commented that she liked the new version of her mother a lot, and so did Lou. But that wasn't a good enough argument for Isaac. After all, Lou agreed with anything his sister said, but the girl was determined to convince him and said that this time it was her brother who had said that first. Defeated, the prince asked how the two ended up in that conversation about Estella, because he thought they were talking about fixing the dolls, and they snapped back saying they could talk about their mother if they wanted to, which wasn't a lie. But honestly, Isaac didn't know what to say. After all, the woman said out of nowhere that she traveled through time to end up in that year. Also, she didn't know anything about the investigation of his parents or about this divorce. She kept repeating that she was a time traveler as if she were some kind of fairy tale character who didn't even exist anymore. However, when he saw her face on the day she saw Benjamin, trying to hold back tears, for a moment Isaac wondered if she might be telling the truth. Could the girl really have come from the past? And if so, where was the Estella he knew and lived with? All of that made him think that maybe things really could be different this time. Maybe he could believe what the girl was saying, even with all the resentment he held in his chest. He only snapped out of the trance when one of his attendants arrived saying he had what he requested. Staring at his excited children, Isaac was not sure yet if he could trust Estella. But either way, he thought the two kids should worry more about the move than about that. He couldn't say what he really thought because Lou would end up bursting into tears and Lucia would bombard him with questions, so he tried to search for words to reply. He had to be rational. Even if things were good now, before Estella changed, they used to fight constantly because of the children. Ever since they were very small, Estella hated the idea of letting them go outside to the garden. And as a result, the poor kids never even left the estate. One day, one of their maids took the children outside for a walk and ended up facing a severe punishment from Estella and disappeared afterwards, even after apologizing. After that incident, all the other maids began to be afraid of the protagonist. Since he had nothing good to say, he decided to dodge the children and asked them to wait because he was going to call the nanny so they could continue playing. When he finally went to his quarters, he found his informant, who was talking to him about a man who had been very important to the drug trafficking that had started 7 years ago, because in general, he dealt with illegal drugs and sold them to other smaller criminals. That part about the criminals was new to the prince. But the informant explained that, unlike other drugs, these were undetectable and had neither taste nor smell when used, so they were hard to detect, even with the most refined mechanisms. And 7 years ago, he tried to flee the country and was caught right away, but it seemed like the man was now resuming his business. However, he was quickly captured by Isaac's soldiers. The man tied to the chair screamed, saying that he didn't know anything and had no relation to this drug scheme. But Isaac only stared at him with indifference. His informant was the one playing rough, telling him to stop lying and asking if he really believed they were supposed to think that kid was just an innocent person who didn't even know he was transporting drugs. The problem was that the young man swore on his life that he didn't know. He didn't know anything, and would honestly rather be killed right away because he was innocent. The servant was already ready to punch him in the face, threatening the man and asking how long he planned to stall them, and the accused closed his eyes so he wouldn't have to see that scene. That was when Isaac asked about his family, making him even more tense. He wanted to know if his family had been taken too, while holding the servant's arm so he wouldn't do anything before they got answers. The prince approached the boy and asked who had told him to keep his mouth shut, and made it clear that if that person had captured his family, he could tell the truth, because Isaac would do everything in his power to help. But that depended on his cooperation, of course. The prince insisted on his offer, reminding him that he would do anything to help his family in exchange for cooperation. He knew it was a shot in the dark, because he would look like an idiot if they hadn't kidnapped the boy's family to blackmail him. But he couldn't imagine another reason that would make someone ask to be killed without hesitation. Then the man broke down, begging Isaac to save his family and confessing that he had no idea things would end that way. According to him, 7 years ago, someone approached him. After explaining everything, the prince went over it again, confirming that the person who helped him with the smuggling was the same person who bought the drugs. So that guy had to hide, but came back when he received a letter saying that if he wanted to save his family, he had to go to the Messians. And Isaac asks what those people wanted him to do, to which the young man answers that he needed to be captured by the prince. At that point, Isaac wasn't understanding anything anymore. After all, who would want to be caught on purpose? Basically, King Bertrand asked him to deliver a message to him. If he really wanted to protect the princess and their children, he had to stop what he was doing immediately. Otherwise, Bertrand would not guarantee the safety of his family, or of Isaac's. So it was better to stop digging into the past. Desperate, the boy tied up begged him to just ease some of his anger and then kill him right away, because he couldn't take it anymore. Isaac thought for a moment, then confirmed with the most frightening eyes the boy had ever seen that it was Bertrand who had ordered him to deliver that message. That man really was the devil incarnate. The boy, who was just another pawn in all of this, apologized for what happened to Isaac's father, but suggested that Isaac should just accept that the culprit was him and kill him to stop the investigation. The boy was sweating cold, arguing that just like the prince had a family to protect, he did too. So if Isaac continued the investigation, he would be putting both families in danger, and his children had not committed any crime to deserve that. Seeing that pathetic scene, the prince realized there really was nothing more effective for a confession than guilt. His servant intervenes, asking the Lord if he should inform the other members, but he refuses. After all, they probably didn't even know they were an organization. It was better to keep that secret since Isaac was the only target of Bertrand. But the young man becomes worried. After all, his children and the princess were in danger because of this. But that wasn't a concern for Isaac, who makes it clear he would not let his family be hurt again. So no matter how much Jillian tried to argue, it was useless. When the man was about to leave the room, the poor servant still had to ask him to wait, running after the Lord. They walked down the castle corridors, tense. Until the prince orders the meeting, they had to be postponed and the guards around the village to be reinforced. Jillian takes the opportunity to ask what he should do with the troublemaker. And without any hesitation, Isaac orders him to get rid of him, because he was already sure the man's fate was sealed. In that place, there were two shadows that helped the king. One of them was the Margrave, who was at the border, and the other were the guards who protected him and carried out his darkest orders. They surrounded the king, hidden and unnoticed. When Benjamin was king, he never made much use of them. But Bertrand was definitely going down a different path, so even if Isaac set that smuggler free, he would die anyway. Dismissing Jillian, the prince only requests that the boy inform him when he was ready to dispose of the body. This whole story began 3 years ago, when he started investigating without Estella knowing, and he became convinced that Bertrand was the corrupt one. But of course, he couldn't say that to his wife. Before, and even now, the man was like a father to her, an inexhaustible source of support. So even if he didn't love her anymore, he at least wanted to show her some consideration. Now, Isaac's focus was to straighten everything out, take the kids, and get out of there as soon as possible. But Estella kept trying to build a bond with that place for herself, and he didn't know why. Seeing the scene of her interacting with their children inside the greenhouse made him doubt his plans for a moment. Until then, the only people he needed to protect were Lou and Lucia, so he couldn't understand why the girl kept trying to involve herself with that family. With nightfall, the girl was already preparing to lie down. Estella was happy they had been able to continue sleeping in the same room every night, but at that moment, Isaac's pose was at the very least strange. As if he were posing for an underwear magazine or something like that, and the way he was staring at her made the princess blush. She was sure that man was going to drive her insane. Nervous with the situation, she asks why he was looking at her that way, and the man replies that he should be the one asking that. It was impossible not to notice the strong chest of the prince. So the girl explains that his chest was completely exposed and he was in that seductive pose. Of course, that caught her attention. Since that man had zero self-awareness, he even wondered if maybe he should talk to her about Bertrand in that moment. But it wasn't like he had the slightest desire to tell Estella the truth about him, because his consideration for her could also serve as revenge. He hoped that one day she would discover the truth on her own and feel regret, but the girl had no idea what was going on. She only thought his stares were strange and didn't understand her godfather's true intentions. So, completely diverting the subject, he decides to throw out a casual question and asks what kind of person King Bertrand was. The girl turns, confused, saying he was a good person, since he always treated her as if she were his own daughter. Besides that, he cared for her even today, and Lily treated her like a blood sister. But that wasn't enough, and the prince asked what exactly made him a good person. That's when the girl revealed that she almost died once. During one of her carriage trips, they ended up being hit by a landslide. The situation was so critical that anyone who tried to help would likely not come out alive. Then the carriage began sliding even more at the edge of the cliff, and the drivers couldn't reach the princess in any way. Even so, her godfather cleared the way, removing all the dirt that was covering the carriage. After that, he dug through all the debris that was inside and managed to pull Estella out. The man was covered in blood, but the second he saw her, he hugged her and began calming her down. And as if nothing else mattered, he repeated that everything was fine, and that she was going to be okay. To Estella, that wasn't the kind of thing someone could fake. After he saved her, the rest of the landslide fell and ended up injuring Bertrand's leg. Because of that, the current king was left limping on one leg, all to save the princess. If that hadn't happened, the girl wouldn't be alive to tell that story, or she would have been the one harmed. But even while recovering from his wounds, all Bertrand did was worry about her. That triggered a warning inside Isaac. So her love for him wasn't only because he was like a second father. The man had literally saved her life. That's when Isaac realized he had worded his question in the wrong way. So he tried once more, asking how she would feel if, by any chance, Bertrand betrayed her. Estella had probably never thought about that before, and she gave her husband a very strange look, before confessing that it would definitely hurt her a lot, maybe to a level she wouldn't even be able to bear. In her mind, she assumed it was some kind of analogy about their relationship, since everything the boy said always revolved around that. Isaac moves closer, pulling the girl's chin so she would look at him, and her eyes shine as she sees that boy she loved so much, especially when he calls her darling, something that hadn't happened since she got there. It was strange for Estella to see him being so close like that, but even so, she tried to act normal. But Isaac keeps getting closer, so close that she can feel his breath on her face. And just by looking into his deep eyes, the girl feels her heart racing. He finally says something, asking her not to push herself too hard, which makes Estella ask what he was doing. But the boy explains he was speaking in a general context. And then he stands up, leaving the protagonist disappointed, sitting there on the bed alone with her expectations. The boy decides to take a walk in the castle garden, wondering why every time he looked at Estella, all his plans fell apart. He remembered what happened just minutes ago, when he was so close to the girl, holding her face. He had asked her not to wear herself out, and now he didn't even know what he meant by that. Maybe he was referring to her getting close to the children, or reopening the old investigation. Or maybe he was asking her not to wear herself out, trying to maintain a good image. Only when his wife left everything behind did he realize that Bertrand was the true enemy of Benjamin, and even of Isaac himself. The truth was that Bertrand was about to fall from his throne, and the prince also wanted to take the princess down with him. At least a little. No, not a little. The raw truth was that Isaac wanted the girl to regret what she had done until the end of her days. But if that was really the case, then why did he feel so uncomfortable now with the idea of doing that? Maybe because the princess had a different glow now. It didn't matter what the real reason was. The prince knew he had to leave that place soon, because the girl wasn't going to give up until she won his love back, and he was starting to fall. His peaceful walk was interrupted by Estella, who arrived screaming in the garden. It was a perfect example of everything that was happening, because even after leaving her alone in the room, there she was, running after him like a dog. Panting from trying to get there as fast as she could, she asks her husband to wait, and she says that he could try to discourage her sometimes, but she wasn't going to give up on that love so easily, because she had spent 6 years in love with him, and that had been very difficult. That was a surprise for Isaac, who was used to his wife being cold and distant. But that wasn't the new Estella. She begins venting, commenting on how being the only person in love in a relationship wasn't something anyone could do, especially a girl like her, who was perfect in every aspect. And she takes the opportunity to ask if he had any idea how many men would kill to have a chance with her. However, she had pushed all of them away just so she could go after the one she truly loved, and that someone was Isaac. The boy couldn't even believe what he was hearing, asking if she was really talking about him, to which the girl responds, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, that yes, she was. The protagonist grabs his arm, asking if by any chance he understood how much exhaustion she felt trying to keep those unrequited feelings for 6 years, because not many people were willing to do that. No one wanted to spend 6 years of their own life being in love without any hope. But her whole point with all that rambling was that the boy shouldn't underestimate how long she could insist on that relationship, comparing herself to a parasite. Isaac asks if she understands what she's saying, but the girl has never been more lucid. She really was like a tick. So she says he can try to discourage her as much as he wants. She doesn't care, because she is Estella, and she spent 6 years liking someone who already even had a fiancé. She was freaking out and shouting at that point, repeating over and over that it had been 6 years chasing after Isaac. But even so, he never noticed it, like a real idiot. So it didn't make sense for him to tell her not to exhaust herself too much. Nervous, Isaac asks her to lower her voice a little. Please? But the girl didn't care. She wanted everyone in the castle to hear it. Every maid and servant inside the house could hear her words, making it clear that from that moment on, she would do everything possible and impossible for the two of them to stay together. And if he didn't like it, he could keep pushing her away, because regardless of what he did, she would keep trying. She was willing to set her ego aside for that. It wasn't as if she didn't understand how many mistakes she had made. She knew her husband hated her, but it wasn't fair, because honestly, she hated herself too. Pulling her hair out of sheer frustration, the girl screams, asking why things had ended in such a horrible way. Her reactions made the prince even more nervous. He didn't know how to contain his anger, much less what to say since it was all such a surprise. But it wasn't like he had much space to say anything anyway, because Estella goes back to saying that he himself promised to give her a chance. And even before she could even try, the boy had already made it clear that he had given up because he couldn't do it and she shouldn't tire herself with that. So she asks Isaac not to say those things anymore because she would not give up, because she was there, married to him, after 6 years of unrequited love. So being in that position now was like a miracle, a true gift from God for the girl. When the prince tried to question that gift from God comment, he was scolded by the princess, who told him not to mock the love felt by a 19-year-old girl. She reinforces that she knew he would continue trying to discourage her, but it didn't matter, because she would prove that she wouldn't give up. She was being very serious. He and the children would see what she was willing to do, and all he needed to do was sit and watch, because soon, Isaac would be the one attached to her. Then she turns her back, leaving the boy there confused. But before she goes, Isaac decides to be honest, confessing that the way she was talking sounded exactly like 7 years ago. And another thing that hadn't changed was the fact that he never knew how to react when the princess acted like that. The next day, the girl wakes up alone in the bed, certain that Isaac had left. She wakes up slowly, wondering if he had already gone to do his things, until she heard the children talking with their father. So maybe he was just playing with them. She walks to the window to see what was going on, and finds a peculiar scene. It was her interacting with her husband. That's when she became certain she was dreaming, because Isaac would never smile that sweetly, but it was a very weird dream. Then a woman entered the room asking if that wasn't a good sight. A woman she knew very well, the 26-year-old version of Estella, who confesses she is very happy to see her family happy. But the young girl chatters, asking if her 26-year-old version had gone back in time, and if not, she wanted to know why she had been taken to that year. The older Estella approaches slowly, saying that that was the future the two of them hoped for. But the protagonist didn't want to hear that. She needed answers and wanted to figure out why the woman brought her to the future, and even more importantly, where she was and what she was doing while the girl was stuck there. Calmly, the Estella from the future asks the girl to try to think about it and remember, which was very confusing, because she had lost all memories of the past 7 years. But her other version is calm, asking her to reflect on who she was and what exactly she was doing in that place. Not only that, but also who she was, and who the girl she saw through the window was. But the protagonist asks why she couldn't just answer the question herself, demanding why she had to figure it out alone, poor thing. To which her future version replies that it was because she herself regretted not being able to do that. This caught our girl by surprise. What did she mean she regretted it? The 26-year-old Estella was more serious and had tired eyes. Even so, she reveals herself, giving a hint to the girl, telling her not to forget that 2 copies of the same person could not coexist in just one world. When the princess asked what she was talking about, the woman only repeated, 2 identical people cannot coexist. She was her, and the other was the other. And this was not a problem related to time, but she needed to remember, or at least try. That was when she pulled out a small object that might help her, and she was asked what that was. Then she explains that it was the thing she needed to remember. Estella began to get nervous, asking what she was supposed to remember and how she was supposed to know what had happened to her since she had traveled from the past straight to that moment. Her future version approaches, gripping her by the shoulders, before pushing the 19-year-old girl, who was caught off guard by that shove. But her future self remained calm, smiling as she said that in that case, it was better for the girl to try to discover more about who she was. And then Estella sinks into deep water, just like the day she fell into the lake. That made the girl wake up with a jump, this time for real, finding one of her maids who celebrates the fact that the girl finally woke up, and grumbling as she asks if, at that age, the princess still needed to be woken up. The nanny informs her that Lord Isaac and her daughters were eating together at that moment, and suggests that the girl get dressed so she can meet them in time. But she noticed the woman was sweating cold and approached, asking if she wasn't feeling well. But Estella tries to disguise it with a smile, explaining that everything was fine. She had only had a very intense dream. The nanny offers some water since she seemed thirsty, something the princess accepts without thinking twice, drinking the whole cup in one gulp. Bringing up a more serious subject, she asks if by any chance the nanny believed in dreams, since some people said that dreams could be prophecies. And the woman says yes, but warns that there were also people who think dreams are only dreams. But she believed she had a good reason to believe in them, something that caught Estella's interest. So she asked why. That was when the woman revealed that her reason was the last dreams the former queen had while she was still pregnant with Estella. They didn't used to talk much about her mother, but the nanny explained that the woman had a recurring dream during that period. Of course, they weren't good dreams, and the queen didn't like them at all. Estella, curious, asked what kind of dreams she meant. Then the nanny confessed that Her Majesty always spoke as if she knew she would die an early death, saying that as soon as she gave birth to Estella, she would move on to a better place. But what was most unusual was the fact that she didn't seem afraid of that. Wanting to know even more, our girl asked if by any chance the nanny knew the content of those dreams. And the nanny did. The queen had said that in her dreams she met a woman who was identical to her, and that this woman was the one who told her that as soon as the princess was born, she would die, but she shouldn't be afraid or sad. She even warned the servants that if they had to choose between saving her life or the child's, they should choose the child. It was the first time Estella had contact with that information, or at least that's what she thought, because the nanny made it clear that she had already told her about it before, but quickly remembered that she probably didn't remember. What was curious was that now that she thought about it, the last time she talked with Estella about that, the girl had also asked about dreams, which was surprising. But the nanny didn't seem entertained by the subject anymore, so she only handed a towel to the girl and asked her to wipe her face and go downstairs for breakfast. And so she did, but she wasn't happy at all. After all, she had barely woken up and had already had a terrible dream and discovered terrible things about her mother. What distracted her was her children celebrating the girl entering the dining hall, while Isaac scolded Lucia for swinging her utensils in a way that could hurt someone. The table was very abundant as always, but whether because of her dream or something else, Estella wasn't very in the mood to eat. Isaac, however, seemed more concerned with the children, as always, until Lucia got up asking if her mother was okay and hoping she wouldn't get sick. But the girl smiled, explaining that she wasn't sick and thanking her for the concern. Something in her expression caught the attention of the two, who were amazed, whispering across the table, leaving the parents confused. That was when Lucia quickly climbed down from her chair, approaching Estella, who immediately asked what had happened, and she whispers in her ear, wanting to know if it wasn't time to start the operation for her and Lou to become cupids. To which Estella replies that it wasn't time yet, but soon she would ask for that help. And they didn't need to worry, because when she needed them, she would let them know. Thus, their breakfast continued without many incidents. Thanks to the children, the meal hadn't been uncomfortable. Maybe she was feeling that way because of that dream, which was very strange. And the fact that it resembled her mother's dreams left her even more curious. Now she was in her office trying to find some clue, but it only seemed like a normal study room. She even tried looking at the documents on her desk, but they were basically employee payroll sheets and information about her inheritance, indicating that her future self was very organized. But even though that was unusual for 19-year-old Estella, there wasn't anything very different there. So she tried to focus on understanding what she meant by finding out more about who she had been during those 7 years. She was stressed because 26-year-old Estella could have just said exactly what she wanted and told her what she needed to know. Now that she was awake, she regretted not having grabbed her by the hair the moment she saw her, but she didn't think of it. Either way, it was a little disappointing to see what she had become, a 26-year-old person completely different from who she currently was. Sure, she was an elegant and strong woman, but above all that, she had very tired eyes. When she looked through the window of happiness, she felt a little jealous, but her future self seemed extremely calm. The problem was that now all she knew was that she knew nothing. Suddenly, someone knocked on her door. It was Isaac, commenting that it was the first time he had seen the girl leave the office door open. Earlier, when the boy saw Estella enter the dining room with that bitter look on her face, his stomach turned. It was as if everything had gone back to being exactly how it was before, and he was already prepared to go back to walking on eggshells every time he wanted to say something. But in reality, the girl had been very loving with the children throughout the entire meal. Even so, it was as if her mind were very far from there. After that, when he approached her office, he managed to hear some murmuring. Peeking through the crack in the door, he tried to figure out what she was muttering about, although he couldn't hear clearly. The girl seemed so lost in her own thoughts that he thought she would immediately develop wrinkles. It didn't take long before the children found him, jumping and opening the door all at once, and calling for their mother. Isaac began to sweat cold at that, fearing his wife's reaction, asking them to be quiet because Mommy didn't seem very happy at that moment. His comment made Lou ask if the woman wasn't actually sick, but he reminded them that she herself had said during breakfast that she was feeling fine. But the boy imitated Estella's serious expression to ask why she looked so upset then, and the prince explained that she was just thinking. Still, the boy insisted on knowing why their mother made that face. So Isaac explained that his mother always made that same expression when she was thinking deeply about something, no matter what it was. Trying to distract the kids, the prince suggested that they play a game. The two would have to stay very quiet until their mother noticed their presence, and from then on, anyone who spoke too loudly would lose. Confirming with both of them whether that sounded like a fun game. And getting into the mood, they responded without making a peep, only nodding their heads repeatedly. They had been making too much noise before he said that, so Isaac couldn't help but wonder what Estella could be thinking so deeply that she didn't even notice his presence, considering that normally she was extremely sensitive to the slightest noise. When he finally heard something the girl was saying, it was her saying she regretted not grabbing a woman by the hair the moment she saw her. He had no idea who she was talking about. He could only notice how serious the protagonist had been that whole time. So whatever it was certainly a major source of stress. He also heard when she muttered that the only thing she knew was that she didn't know many things, and he had to restrain himself from saying anything right then, simply staring at the reflective woman. But he ended up feeling awkward, remembering how much he used to love seeing his wife like that, thoughtful, as if nothing else in the world mattered. It was as if she observed everything around her until their eyes met, and she would give a big smile celebrating his presence. The prince would get embarrassed just thinking about it, and that's why he suddenly didn't know what to say and began tripping over his own words. So he commented about it being the first time he had ever seen the girl leave the office door open, confessing that he had always wondered what she considered so important that she needed to hide it from everyone. But now that he was in the room, everything seemed totally normal. Only something else lit up hope in the girl, who asked if he needed her for anything. After all, it wasn't common for him to come looking for her there. Then Lucia finally spoke, explaining that they were there to get their mother, which even surprised her, because the children had been quiet for way too long. As usual, what they wanted most was to play with their parents. Lou also confessed that he was in the mood to play house, or play with the dolls inside the greenhouse. Hearing that, everything made sense. She should have known that was the case because Isaac would never come after her for anything. So the woman stood up, confirming that they were going to play. And that alone was enough to make the children even more euphoric, jumping into their mother's arms for a big hug. That scene moved the prince. It was beautiful to see his wife treating the children well for once. Lucia called him, noticing how distracted he was. But the prince didn't take his eyes off Estella, and a smile escaped his lips even though he tried to maintain a cold posture in front of his wife. While walking through the halls, the boy joked, asking whether the three of them were forming a club on their own or what. Finally, they arrived at the greenhouse, and Lucia whispered something in her mother's ear, and so did Lou. But by now, that was starting to stress poor Isaac, since they were talking only among themselves, so he couldn't even participate in the conversation if he wanted to. When he sighed and suggested that they go play on their own, he was interrupted by Lucia, who suggested that they play house. As usual, Lou called his sister to make mud food and feed both parents. But while running, they suddenly changed their minds, deciding to play shop instead. But even so, they told the parents to wait there and not leave the spot. They were doing an amazing job as cupids, something Isaac had no idea about. To be honest, that wasn't exactly what Estella had in mind when she asked for help, and just the thought of being there alone with her husband made her nervous. Even so, she turned to Isaac with an embarrassed look, finding the man wearing his usual scowl. The protagonist couldn't ignore how things had suddenly become super weird, so she tried to start a conversation, talking about how much Lucia kept jumping, and explaining that she hadn't told the child to do any of that. And Isaac knew, explaining that she was always very quick to catch on to things, but he couldn't ignore the woman's appearance. And he commented that she didn't seem very well, so he asked if she had had trouble sleeping, even though he assumed she slept very well, considering she managed to kick every blanket off the bed. Poor Estella had no idea how he knew that, but she tried not to get too embarrassed and just replied that she had slept well and that she could sleep anywhere, which was strange because Isaac remembered the times he knocked on the protagonist's door asking whether she was having trouble sleeping and was kicked out with the excuse that his wife had a headache. Even so, he commented that he was glad to hear that because normally she had a lot of trouble with insomnia, which was new information for the girl. but he explained that it had been happening ever since she gave birth to the children, and that he tried everything, even burning incense through the house, but nothing helped. That information was very confusing for her, because her nanny had said she never cried and always slept extremely deeply ever since she was a baby. Still, Isaac tried to be understanding, saying he imagined things had been difficult for the princess. After all, besides not being able to sleep, the children always made a lot of noise, and now she had all the stress of dealing with her father's condition, not to mention the relationship between the two of them, which was terrible. And maybe she hated being there, or maybe she wished she had someone else at her side. At least that was what the prince had always assumed. Hearing that hurt Estella a little. The girl didn't think she was that kind of person. Even the version of herself that only existed in her dreams wasn't like that. She didn't look at Isaac as if she hated him, so she asked him to stop thinking that way, explaining that he was very wrong. But she didn't understand why he had already given up on saving their marriage. He was trying to avoid his own pain. When the children came back, that conversation had to end, and they went back to pretending they were in a restaurant. Lucia was probably the most creative, asking whether her mother liked the tea she was drinking, something she confirmed. The children commented that their parents looked very cute together and wished them a great date. And Estella let slip that she thought the two had never left the palace, so she wanted to know where they learned to speak like that, to which Isaac replied that she had allowed the two to go out once. They took the twins to a restaurant and the kids started copying the way the waitresses talked from that day on. The princess then suggested that they take the children to walk around the city someday, maybe to a theater, but she was quickly interrupted, which put her on alert. What was normal whenever she talked to her husband? Without beating around the bush, Isaac asked whether she felt sorry for the children. So she explained that it wasn't exactly that. It was more like she wanted to make things right, but to him she didn't need to feel that way, with so much guilt on her shoulders. Because even though they hadn't had enough moments with their own mother, they had spent that time with him. So they never felt neglected or anything like that. In fact, they were doing very well, just the three of them until now. And they would definitely be fine after moving on. His final words made the girl tremble, and she asked why he was acting as if she wasn't part of that family, as if he were leaving her out once again, which silenced Isaac. It was something she did a lot, no matter what she said. But then she confessed that this reality hurt her too, and the boy stepped in, trying to explain that he wasn't trying to hurt her or make her feel bad. It was just that the girl was working so hard to get closer to the children and reconcile with him. And that was exactly what worried the prince. Because what would happen if the original Estella simply came back, and the Estella of now had to return to her own reality? The woman in front of him was honest and full of love to give. She didn't hesitate to show all of that to the children. But the Estella the prince remembered was very different. She was harsh, cold, and uninterested in anything. Sometimes when she looked at him and the children, it was as if she didn't even recognize them. So he was afraid that someday that happy dream would end and everything would go back to how it was before. Because he knew that the ones who would suffer the most would be the children. And he made it clear that he didn't want his kids to get hurt if one day their mother went back to being the cold woman she used to be. So he could take care of them very well on his own. Hearing all of that was like a punch to Estella's stomach. Once again, she wondered why her future self had made so many wrong choices. Maybe she thought that a man who loved her wouldn't be hurt by that kind of behavior. But all Isaac had done all those years was hide all his pain for the sake of the children. She began to speak, or at least tried to, because a tear rolled down her face. And many more after that, while she tried to explain that all she could do now was apologize, because it was already done. Now more than ever, she had no idea why she had been sent to the future. And all she managed to say to the prince was that she loved him. But even that ended up hurting him. The atmosphere was very strange for Isaac, because normally the only feeling Estella ever showed toward him was irritation. But now there she was, crying because of him right in front of him. He knew he was being very stubborn, trying to force a revenge by throwing those things in Estella's face when she didn't even know exactly what was happening. But that wasn't the Estella who never listened to what he said. On the contrary, that woman would be all ears whenever he wanted, no matter what he intended to say. Meanwhile, during all that, the children were playing with the absolute certainty that their parents were having lots of fun together. But when Lucia turned around to confirm it, she didn't see a happy scene at all, and she ran to her mother screaming, followed by Lou, who begged her not to cry, while the girl asked her father whether he was the one who made their mother get like that, giving the man small punches, and complaining, saying that they had left the two of them alone on purpose. But she still couldn't believe Isaac had done that. In the middle of all that shouting, the children were still trying to comfort their mother, repeating over and over that she shouldn't cry. Later, after all that mess, the four of them were gathered in the dining room again, sharing another meal. And with their nerves calmer, Isaac was looking at his children. Estella was doing the same, thinking that on that day they had gotten tired a lot, because they were practically falling asleep at the table. probably because of the earlier chaos and the situation of having to apologize to Isaac. Flashbacks from that moment show Lucia explaining that she had already made up with their father, so their mother should too, saying the two of them should kiss to seal the agreement. They didn't know what to say, while the little girl just wanted to know what they were waiting for and why they hadn't done it already. Now, here they were, sharing a meal like civilized people. When the nanny noticed how tired the children were, she sent them straight to bed, but Estella stood up as well. And taking them together with Isaac, she explained that the two of them would put the children to sleep, asking the nanny to get some rest. That was something very unusual. It had been a long time since the nanny had seen the couple act that way, as if they actually liked one another, or at least had some kind of bond. They arrived in the room together, fixing everything so their children could sleep well. Clingy as always, Lucia asked her mother to pet her head, since she used to do that very often before, and that request came as a surprise to the girl, but she did it anyway, wishing the little one sweet dreams while running her fingers through her hair. Isaac couldn't help but watch all that affection, even though he didn't say anything. Before leaving the girl alone there with their children, he wondered if she really used to do that all the time, because her husband had said clearly that her future self had absolutely no interest in those children. When Lucia finally fell asleep, it was time for Estella to leave, but she was surprised when she opened the door, because Isaac was standing there like a statue. She smiled, commenting that she thought he had already gone back to the room, and the prince stared at her, serious. As soon as he closed the door, Estella asked whether there was some specific topic they needed to discuss, thinking maybe it was something he couldn't say in front of the children. But before the man could say anything, Estella explained that she didn't expect the two kids to go that far with their request. But Isaac made it clear that he wasn't there waiting to fight with her. Since that was something new, Estella asked what the reason for waiting was then, but the prince answered directly. He just told the girl to follow him. She couldn't believe that the guy who hated her until a few minutes ago was waiting just so they could walk together through the palace. Even so, he was firm in that decision. And Estella followed him, but all that silence was killing her, so she said she needed to ask something. She wanted to know the reason why he hadn't abandoned her earlier. That was a very good question, one he might not even have the right answer to yet, so the girl began blabbering as usual. She knew the question was weird, but frankly, at this point she already knew what her future self was like. Neglecting the family and probably full of affairs with other men. All she did was hurt the man, who was now staring at her with nothing to say. Even so, she was the one who had asked for the divorce. So she was curious to know why he didn't leave even after being treated like trash, suggesting that maybe it was because she was the mother of his children and he wanted them to be raised by their biological mother or something like that. But Isaac interrupted, making it clear that wasn't the reason. In reality, there was something he simply couldn't abandon, something Estella had once said to him, and that he could never forget or walk away from. When she was still young, the girl had asked the man to promise that he would always trust her and always wait for her, confessing that she really hoped he would. And he also hoped that the girl would return to who she used to be one day, that bright-eyed girl who confessed that she loved him far too much. But he summarized it for Estella. She had asked him to wait, so he trusted that, and he wanted to keep trusting. The girl insisted on knowing what exactly she had said to him. That had affected him so strongly. She couldn't imagine anything she could have said that would keep him around even in that state. Isaac felt cornered by those questions, but he decided to be honest, explaining that she had asked whether he would trust her and always wait for her, no matter what, because she loved him enough to do all of that for him. And that was a lot. Maybe she didn't think it was anything particularly special to say, but to him it meant the world, which was truly a surprise to Estella. But the prince makes it clear that now things were different. And turning his back, he says that it wasn't special anymore, being scolded by Estella. But the man tries to change the subject, saying the girl must be tired and that they should go back already. The two continue walking down the hallway, silent like before, and the prince sighs, regretting having told so many important things to that girl who hurt him. But the protagonist grabs his hand, triggering an alarm inside the man, before calling him by his name, asking him to wait at least for a moment. Isaac even tried asking what she was doing, but the girl cut him off immediately, explaining she wasn't very good with words. Even so, she continued her speech, saying that she grew up in a reality where it didn't matter how she asked for things. All she needed to do was say what she wanted, and she could get anything, no matter what it was. So whatever she told people was, in fact, what she meant to say. She couldn't understand how the man wasn't even curious to know her side, because honestly, she was going insane just thinking about it. She loved him to such a level that she had even said those things to him. The princess had a crush on the man for 6 years, but it didn't even take her 4 full years to change her mind. She asked Isaac whether he didn't think that was, at the very least, weird. Before he could answer, the girl interrupted him, confessing that she definitely thought so. And truthfully, she didn't understand how something like that had happened. When the girl finally fell silent, Isaac tried pulling his hand away, telling her to let go of him, but the girl only tightened her grip, making it clear that she wasn't going to let him go, and she proposed that they make a promise to each other. If they happened to discover that her future self had really gone through a drastic change of heart, then Estella would apologize and let Isaac live his life far away. However, if there was something behind all of that, then the prince had to give her a chance. Something that did not please him at all. Even so, the girl explained that she was going to investigate everything her future self was doing, with complete honesty, swearing that if she had really changed her feelings, she would take responsibility. Still, the man scoffs, asking what difference it made if she had really changed her mind about things. But Estella was serious. No matter how much she thought about it, it was hard to believe that she would simply hurt Isaac and the children for a meaningless reason. The prince finally manages to break free, saying that that was exactly what had happened, and asking how much longer she was going to make him look like an idiot, because she couldn't just hurt him and think she wouldn't leave any scars. He wasn't just someone she could throw away whenever she decided she was tired of him. But Estella tries to explain that that wasn't what she meant. Not that it mattered. The prince was determined, and he insisted on asking whether she had the slightest idea of how deep the scars she left on him were. So even if it had been a sudden change of heart, or any other reason for her having done those things, he didn't care. But if that was really what the girl wanted, then fine. He would grant that request and let Estella sort things out. He could even listen to as many love confessions as the girl wanted to make. Because at the end of the day, what was happening wasn't the fault of the 19-year-old Estella. But in exchange for that deal, he needed her to stop hurting him. Sincerely, the princess explains that she just wanted all of that to be a misunderstanding. But Isaac argues that that was exactly why he told her not to try getting closer to him anymore, because it would only end up hurting her in the end. Out of patience already, our girl tells him to do whatever he wanted and turns her back, making it clear that she was a very stubborn person, so of course she would do whatever she wanted, slamming the doors and abandoning Isaac there alone. Stressed, he even tries calling out to the girl, but he didn't have much strength left to keep arguing, leaning against the closed door, exhausted. Before leaving completely, the princess suddenly throws the doors open and screams for him to not even think about sleeping in another room, because he couldn't just run from the situation. That actually offends him, making him question when exactly he ever tried running away. But to her, that was exactly what the prince was doing at that moment. After all, if she were in his place, she would be more worried about figuring out together whether it had really been a change of heart. She would even take advantage of it to gain some financial benefit, honestly. She would turn his life into a living hell and make him run back to his country in desperation. So why hadn't the man done any of that? After all, he hated her. That last part manages to offend Isaac even more, making him shout that he didn't hate Estella, which immediately makes her ask why. And then the prince reveals what was probably his biggest secret. I didn't hate you because I loved you too much to do that. His words create an overwhelming silence in the room, before the man corrects himself, saying he loved her in the past, because everything was over, and he didn't want to see the woman he loved so much fall into ruin like that. His words strike Estella directly, making her heart race. But before she can say anything, the boy already tells her not to get foolish ideas from what he said, which she didn't intend to do. Exhausted, they talk about sleeping in separate bedrooms at least that night. When she finally left the room, Estella felt awful. It was as if he was saying all of that to her current version, but she didn't even have time to think too much, because her maid immediately asked whether the prince wouldn't be accompanying her, to which the girl responds that they decided to sleep in separate rooms at least that night. And the maid can't help but comment that she thought things were getting better and ask what happened. However, honestly, Estella explains that she didn't know and had no idea how things ended up like that. So it must be a very complicated situation, considering that Her Majesty was also lost. But the maid confesses that all the workers in the mansion had been anxiously waiting for the couple to reconcile. And in an emotional moment, the girl says that she was also rooting for that, taking advantage of the fact that Miela, the maid, had known Estella since her crush on Isaac began. She decided to ask whether she also thought she had treated him very badly. And she answers that there were times when she was caught off guard, but she imagined something she didn't know about must have been going on. Sometimes she ran into Estella when the children were already asleep. She used to go into their bedroom, something that surprises the princess since she had heard Isaac say several times that she didn't care about her children. But the maid continues explaining that she was saying those things only because the girl had lost her memory, but she thought her behavior was very strange. She went into the children's room while they were sleeping, watched them sleep, and even stroked their heads. It was a love she usually didn't show, and for some reason she was keeping that a secret. That was when Estella remembered what Lucia had said about her always doing head caresses on her, so that meant it was true. And Miela continues explaining that she found it all very bizarre, because she couldn't understand why someone who loved her children that way would try so hard to pretend otherwise. That was a question our girl still didn't have an answer for, but it was crucial information that confirmed there was something else behind the whole situation. The princess takes advantage of their conversation to ask who she was closest to around there, and the maid struggles to remember anyone specific, until a light flashes in her mind. She informs that Estella was very close to the Madame of the Salon de Rodonia. Confused, the princess confirms whether she really meant Madame de la Reine. It was curious to think that that woman who knew everything about everyone was so close to Estella, but Miela confirms it, saying that it was precisely the princess who gave the Salon de Rodonia to her. It was hard to believe. So our girl asks whether she really had given away the salon. And again, the maid confirms, explaining that she saw the salon at an auction and then gave it to the madame. In fact, at that time, it was all the citizens could talk about, since the fact that the biggest salon in the Messians had been given to a foreigner was at least unusual. That made the girl think that if Madame de la Reine were a man, they probably would have spread rumors about her being her lover. But that didn't make sense because she, of all people, didn't even seem like her closest friend, but she had given her that huge establishment. However, if she thought about it, the madame knew about her men and the gifts. She remembered when she first visited the salon and was received by the woman who explained that her men had brought the jewels she requested. Maybe she was acting as the intermediary of her relationships or something like that, a messenger for all of her flings. She even seemed perplexed when she heard Estella say she didn't need to meet with those guys anymore. She was going crazy to the point of slapping her own head, scaring poor Miela, who tried to hold Estella back so she wouldn't hurt herself. And she asked if everything was all right. At that moment, the princess scolded herself because she should have paid more attention, especially since there was a popular saying that everything you look for is right under your nose. So she decided to ask the maid to send a message inviting Madame de la Reine to the palace the next day. That caught Miela completely off guard, but the princess was decided. She was sure de la Reine knew something about whatever it was. Wanting to discover even more, Estella asks if by any chance there was anything she had revealed to the maid and asked her to keep secret. But the only thing that came to mind was that Her Majesty had asked not to let anyone enter her office. And even when it was cleaned, it was Estella who took care of it herself, without any servant helping. Considering that, the girl asks that those things remain hidden. On the other side of the castle, in his own room, was Isaac, sighing, tired of everything. That was when he noticed the pile of letters on the floor, catching his full attention, and he soon approached to pick them up. He ended up reading an old letter from Estella where the princess said she was starting to get used to writing to him and hoped the two could meet soon. He knew he didn't love her, or at least shouldn't love her. That night, Estella slept alone, and she ended up having the same dream with her future version. This time, she went straight to asking if by any chance she wasn't going to tell her what she was supposed to find out. But the woman only said that she needed to discover it on her own, just like she had already said. Stressed, the girl asks exactly why she needed to do that, being called a fool and warned that if she kept searching for the version of herself that other people described, she would never find who she truly was. When she started freaking out from being called dumb, her future self immediately cut her off, unable to believe how immature she had once been. But then, what was it that made her so amazing? Scaring Isaac and her own children with harsh words? Out of patience, the girl questions whether she had been summoned because she was failing at something. She was exhausted from all that beating around the bush, so she yelled, snatching the book from her future self's hands and telling her to stop pretending she didn't know anything. The eyes of the 26-year-old Estella were tired as always, while the 19-year-old Estella looked on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Once again, she comments on how honest and immature that girl was. And even so, those were her almost infallible weapons. None of this made the slightest sense to the young girl, but it was all the woman could say, reminding her again that she needed to try to remember, because it was the only way to save everyone. Then the younger Estella asks why she couldn't just tell her, and why all of that was happening. However, like all dreams, this one didn't last long, and she soon woke up alone in her room. The nanny entered worried, which happened a lot after the protagonist's accident, saying she would call the doctor, but her mistress asks her not to do that and explains that everything was fine. Even so, the nanny keeps worrying, asking if the princess was really okay, to which she replies babbling that she couldn't remember anything. Something that didn't make much sense to the older woman. So she decided to be honest and revealed that someone in her dreams said something to her, but she couldn't remember through all the tears. Since it didn't seem to be a real situation, the nanny ended up letting it go, saying it was better if she got ready and left the room soon. Once that distress passed, the girl met Isaac in the greenhouse for tea as usual. This time they were quieter than ever, and even Estella didn't seem to make much effort to talk. However, the prince didn't fail to notice that she was wearing the clothes she used when receiving guests, so she explains that she requested a meeting with the madam from the Salon de Rodonia. Isaac probably didn't like that woman, considering the look he made at his wife upon hearing that. But Estella was very excited. smiling from ear to ear, commenting that she heard she was very close to her, so she probably knew something about what the girl used to do. The tone of false surprise from Isaac sounded ironic, and the girl even considered saying something. But for better or for worse, Miela interrupted the two, asking for permission to inform that Madame de la Reine had arrived at the palace. She had been saved by the bell, so she took the excuse to leave, and said they could continue the tea later. Lucia, however, grabbed her mother, asking if she was going to meet someone, receiving a caress on the face, which was something common from the new Estella. Then our girl followed the maid out of there, leaving Lucia curious about the fact that her mother didn't say anything, but Isaac explains that she was going to meet a friend. For the two children, the only thing that mattered was that she came back soon so they could play as a family. Meanwhile, Isaac stared at his own reflection in the tea, thinking about everything that was happening in his life. In the visiting room, however, the atmosphere was very different, even though the menu was the same. The princess asked the maids to excuse them, leaving only the two of them there, and she decided to go straight to the point, asking Madame de la Reine who she was exactly. The question clearly caught the Madame by surprise, but Estella went deeper, explaining that since she owned the Salon of Rodonia, she imagined the woman had already heard the rumors that the princess had lost her memory. After all, it wasn't as if the nobles didn't talk about it all the time. At one of their gatherings, they said they heard she was completely different. Others heard she suffered a serious accident and was bedridden recovering. But there were also people who believed that her fall in nobility, thanks to her marriage to Isaac, was what truly affected her. That meeting between the two was now just a confirmation of the rumors, although Madame thought that the princess was simply following other plans, which apparently wasn't the case, but maybe that was more comforting. So Estella reaffirms that she really did lose her memory, and Madame de la Reine sips her tea, trying to understand the whole situation. Since for some reason she didn't seem surprised, the princess can't help pointing that out. But the woman doesn't dive into that topic. She only asks how she could help, to which Estella responds that she thought the madam might know her very well and wanted to know more about what exactly their relationship was, commenting that she even heard she bought the Salon of Rodonia and handed it over to the madam on a silver platter, something the madame confirms. But the princess questions what the motivation behind that would be. The problem is that the woman couldn't say, shattering the princess's expectations, who immediately asks why not. Then Estella explains that it was because of her own orders. Every word she said only made the princess even more confused. But according to her supposed friend, she had made the madame swear to never reveal anything to her under any circumstance, because the princess needed to learn on her own, whatever that meant. That was insane. It was the exact same thing her future self said in the dream, as if she knew that this meeting would happen. Gathering her things, the madame apologizes for that being all she could say and for not being able to help much. For Madame de la Reine, who knew far more than she could reveal, the dirt she had been keeping to carry out some secret plan wouldn't be used now, so she would need to inform her colleagues to postpone their plans for the time being. But before she could leave, Estella says she needed to ask one more question. She wanted to know what the madam thought of her and what kind of person she was in her eyes. To which the woman responds that Estella was someone deserving of great respect, and comments that maybe she couldn't tell her everything, but when she started recovering her memories, she might be able to help. And the princess can't help apologizing. After all, she had come from far away and was already leaving. But she asks one of her butlers to escort the madame and hopes she can at least rest a little on the trip back. But for the madame, everything was fine. In fact, she was happy to be able to see the princess in those conditions, since it had been a while since they last met. She even asks her to visit Rodonia when she can, because a new visit might even help her recover her memories. Taking a small paper from her purse, she says she might be able to appear somewhat early, but the chess couple's banquet would be held in her salon in Rodonia, and other noble women who were close to Estella would be there, so maybe it would be good if she showed up. However, she understood that solving her situation with Isaac was the highest priority at the moment. Even so, she hoped her friend could come, leaving her alone. That stressed our girl to the max, since it was clear that the madam knew something important about her future self, but it really didn't seem like she was going to tell anything. Those words echoed in her head nonstop. You need to find out on your own. It was as if that annoying dream was haunting her, and the princess couldn't understand why no one could tell her the truth. It was extremely frustrating. Already inside the carriage, Madame de la Reine looked back as if she were leaving her friend behind in suffering. But the carriage departed just the same. The butler, who was with her inside, asked if things didn't end well with the princess, to which the woman responded with a long sigh, commenting that things were exactly as 26-year-old Estella had predicted. In other words, very badly. Hearing that made the man extremely worried. Even so, Madame de la Reine celebrated the fact that she hadn't lost even more memories yet, but said it was better to hold the plan for a while and spread the news. However, the man warned that they would at least need to form some kind of timeline to keep the group sane. But for now, all the woman could do was hope her friend would recover all her memories soon or manage to discover things another way. The butler asked if she was nervous because that was exactly what it seemed. And the woman explained that even though she expected things to end that way, she still felt anxious knowing the girl was so unaware of everything. Thinking about that, the man asked why she couldn't simply tell the princess what she wanted to know. But that was absurd. And the madame even threatened to cut the man's tongue out if he dared say anything to the princess, even the smallest detail. In fact, just the thought of him being one of her subordinates already made her nervous. But the man asked her to stop with those threats because she didn't need them. After all, he also knew things, and revealing them would be a massive violation of the rules. Her friend, when she made the choices she made, was holding on to the last thread of hope she had. That made Madame de la Reine even more worried, because if Estella failed once again, maybe there would be no return. And they both knew that very well. The expression on the man's face was dark, as if he were afraid of the future itself. Changing the subject a little, Madame de la Reine asked whether at least the princess seemed to be managing to fix things with her husband. But the butler denied it, explaining that the two of them were extremely stubborn, which was very frustrating. He was sure things would be a little better if at least the two of them knew that Bertrand was a common enemy. But the woman reminded him that Estella herself asked the two of them not to interfere in that, and since they knew it was for her own good, they had to follow the rules to the letter. The man shouted, completely stressed in the middle of all that confusion, saying those rules were stupid, and even questioned whether God played according to the rules, receiving several hits from the woman, who used the folding fan she was holding to reprimand him. For Madame de la Reine, just the mention of a god was already enough to make her laugh. Then she made it clear that the butler must not let himself be influenced by some idiotic humans, and he must not forget that their loyalty belonged only to Princess Estella, and to no one else. Guys, what was that? Every time I think the drama is calming down, the story just throws another emotional grenade at us. First of all, Isaac is a walking red flag with boyfriend potential. He keeps acting like he's so done with Estella, but let's be serious. That man is one compliment and half a hug away from having a full emotional breakdown. And the way he hit her with "I loved you too much to hate you"? Hello? Who drops a line like that and then expects the other person not to catch feelings again? And Estella? Girl lost her memory. Her entire life is upside down, and she's still out here screaming in the garden that she chased this man for 6 years and she'll do it again. So let me know what you guys think. Is Isaac actually done with her? Or is he folding in slow motion? Because I can't stand the "stay away from me," and then stares at her like he wants to kiss her into another dimension 5 seconds later. Are we about to suffer 12 more episodes before the kiss? I am loving this story. What you think is going to happen in the next episodes? Do you want me to bring part 2? Tell me at the comments. The story is called Falling into the Deep End, and I covered up to episode 22. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the part 2 and other stories. Kisses, and see you next time.